Hello friends! In this video you will see a manhwa called Beast's Flower, part 1 through 2. Please put a like and subscribe if you like this video. It will help the channel grow. Thank you. And in the description under the video there are time codes, with which you will quickly go to the right part. So, let's go.
Swear that you will stay. Keep trying for one day.
In a village lived a beautiful lady in the fall, and a terrible witch. The latter was ugly, with dull hair and bulging bones. But worst of all, her body exuded the most horrible stench. She was known as the Cursed Witch. She kidnapped and ate small children, and her curses were so powerful that they wreaked death everywhere. It was because of him that the whole village was plagued by the plague. The beautiful lady couldn't stay away any longer. She united the people and drove the witches into the dark forest. After that, peace came at last, and no one ever heard of the witch living in the forest again. So everyone was forbidden to go into the forest. And if anyone saw the witch, he had to get away immediately. That's the kind of scarecrow they used to scare the local children. The witch would come and eat them. They, in turn, just smiled as if they understood. Why was the girl called a cursed witch? Isn't she a cursed witch? What a fool! It was because she stank, and these two were talking amongst themselves about how there were still backwoods villages where mages were called witches. What ignorant hillbillies. Except he couldn't just walk away in silence. They were having tea at Lord Valencia's estate, and that beautiful woman was looking out the window, smiling happily. Surely this isn't a dream. Her name was Ariadne. Apparently the rumors weren't lying, since his path stretched even through the village lands. The crown prince was indeed looking for a bride. It was Lord Valencia. The girl, on the other hand, was confident. Even if it was the crown prince, was it possible for someone not to fall in love with her at first sight? She only asked her father to help because she would take care of the rest. What a father wouldn't do for his daughter? But the crown prince doesn't even look at ordinary girls. The man couldn't believe he was even looking for a bride in small villages. What's gotten into him? What an asshole. How dare this filthy lowlife? Lord Valencia tried to calm his daughter, but Ariadne refused. She wanted to deal with it herself. The guard was tired of telling the intruder that she shouldn't be here. Before she lied about being the Lord's daughter, she should have washed her face first. Lila stood in front of him. Did she bathe in a cesspool? How could she smell like that? And now the mistress has arrived. Ariadne let the guard go because she wanted to talk to Lila herself. But the man was still going to stick around, even if he couldn't disobey. Lila's house was falling apart. That was why she had come. It was the 3rd month she hadn't been sent anything from the manor. She had nothing to eat. Ariadne was angry that her companion was demanding to be looked after. How much longer would this go on? At her age, she should have learned how to do it. A long time ago, maybe she should have found a husband and confronted him with her whims. Or earn a living on her own. Wasn't Lila ashamed to live like this? Ariadne had thrown her a coin over the fence for just buying something. Except she couldn't go to the market either. Why? Because of the stench. The mere sight of Lila gave me the creeps. Lord Valencia's daughter was afraid she'd stink too. That's why she asked the damn stinking witch to stay out of her sight. She had no choice but to go back. Back to the dark forest. Back to the dark house. The rain made it so slippery that Lila hurt herself. She wandered around all day, but found nothing useful. And she had to clean up, sew clothes from leftover fabric, and at least put a bucket where the roof was leaking. What could Lila do in the dark? After all, even if she could use the money, she wouldn't lay a finger on Ariadne's handout. When she was born, Lila was immediately rejected by her parents because of the vile stench. Ariadne had been born a year later, but she, her older sister, had no respect for her. Even the nannies refused to take care of her because of her disgust. As a result, Lila was sent to the barn, away from the estate. Several years passed like that, and suddenly, she saw Ariadne being given her 8th birthday present already, and it was the foal she wanted so badly. Her father had never forgotten what his little Ariadne had dreamed of. The girl, however, smiled gloatingly when she saw Lila and said that it was getting nasty. She couldn't stand the stench anymore. Before that day, the witch had been living in a dirty barn for 10 years, but she was going to spend just as long in that hut. Why should she live like this? because she's a witch cursed with a stench. It wasn't Lila's fault she was born this way. What was it her grandfather used to say? Only by overcoming the trials sent by God can one find happiness. It was only her faith in those words that had allowed her to survive here for so many years. But Lila couldn't wait for that happiness anymore. What was that sound? Thanks to Ariadne's efforts, her older sister has become known as a cursed witch, so this godforsaken hut isn't even approached. Then who is it? Patience was already running out. Who dared to mock her? Why else would someone come here? If there really is a god, Lila only wanted one thing. She begged him to send someone who would ruthlessly spare her from this fate. Was it him then? The girl couldn't even remember the last time she had stood so close to another person. It was the first time she had seen another's face so clearly. Even when Lord Valencia visited Lila once a year, she never got to see his features accurately during the conversation because he kept her out. But from what it might have seemed, this young man was glad to see her. The stranger thanked Lila for opening the door for him and explained that he was out hunting and had gotten lost, and therefore asked her to take a break at her place. What was she to do? The girl knew she should be more careful with strangers. She had hurried to the entrance in vain. Was he on the hunt? Could that be believed? And he didn't look like a bandit. It was suspicious to rob a rotten hut. The man begged Lila, but you couldn't trust that face. He even promised to give her a reward. Money. The girl replied that it wasn't required and the guy could just walk in for nothing. Lila threatened him. If he obeyed, she would allow him to stay in her house for a while. The stranger would rest here and then leave. Of course he agreed. This is her property after all. Did he really have no other intentions? To be honest, Lila wished she could kick him out right now, but it was raining so hard outside. There was no way something would happen to him. She only agreed out of pity. The man obediently sat down and took off his hood. It was so dark inside, and that's why he asked to turn on the light, but she was out of oil. The stranger had encountered this kind of thing often, so it would be worth stocking up on such things, but few people did. What did he mean by that? Something was clearly wrong. Because of the smell, it should hardly be possible to even breathe in here. So why was he laughing as if nothing had happened? It was like nothing was bothering him at all. If the girl didn't want the money, what was he doing? Lila was telling him to stop moving. But what was that? The man hadn't counted on a meal, so he didn't think beef jerky would be enough as a thank you for everything. Why did he sound like he would honor any request from Lila? Such a strange type. Now he wanted to know who his savior was. Who was she? Not a name. Maybe that's what he meant. As it turned out, yes. What was left for her to do? The stranger called himself Firest. Except Lila didn't ask. What secret was he hiding? His manner of speech was also strange, as was his outfit. It seemed the protagonist had heard it somewhere before, but while she was thinking about it, her soup escaped. Firest wanted to know what Lila was cooking. The man could tell it smelled good, except he couldn't smell the odors. Was this some kind of God's test, too? What was Lila supposed to do? She'd had terrible thoughts as a child, and she'd told her grandfather about it. Although he had a disadvantage in the form of constant drinking, but he taught the girl a lot: politeness, hygiene, and other little things. Despite the fact that Lila lived in a barn and faced only scorn because of the smell, her grandfather, though he crooked his face, did not mock her or ignore her. He was one of the few who knew that the protagonist was the daughter of a lord. That was probably why the man was always there for her. God does not forgive those who cut their lives short. If you do that, you'll have to pay the price in the next life. That's what he said that day. Lila didn't believe it. She thought it was some kind of joke, but to put up with the incessant cruelty and not die just because of fear for the next existence, how could that be called life? The protagonist didn't understand much, but he thought exactly that. He wondered if Lila could smell her body odor. The answer was no, so maybe that was God's plan. Every life has a price, which means the odor came from her for a reason. If the protagonist can deal with it, it will disappear. Then it's probably not a lie. Did Virse really have no sense of smell? Did he perceive Lila as a completely normal person? Then how did it come out? The fact that the man had fallen off a horse as a child, and because of the injury was completely now unable to smell. It was like the truth. That acrid stench emanating from the main character's body rendered her unable to perceive any odors. The scent of a burning fire or the freshness of nature after rain. She would never be able to smell it. Yrst, on the other hand, wished he could savor the flavor of her delicious dish. Except it was just cabbage soup. So what if he didn't have a sense of smell? It didn't make any difference. He was only here because he needed a place to stay. What happened? Did the man pretend he couldn't smell anything? Yrst explained that he'd been too careless before finding the cabin, which had left him traumatized. Apparently, the wound had opened. The new acquaintance was going to go back to his place and treat the wound when the rain stopped. But she knew exactly what the look that darkened people's faces in her presence was expressing: disgust and contempt. Could Lila have confused it with anything else? There was no point in thinking about it now, though. She agreed with him, but he only seemed to be getting worse. It wasn't like he wasn't ready for something yet. Though no, this girl wasn't ready. Yrst couldn't taste her right now. At Lord Valencia's house, the young men were having dinner, but looking at Yrst's reaction, the host thought he didn't like something. Fortunately, the food was impeccable. A good cook was a find and a credit to the host. The guests realized this after trying only one dish, and the Lord liked to hear that from His Highness, the Crown Prince. The man added that he was wandering through the forest yesterday and happened to come across a hut, so he wondered who lived there. Lila's father gave a negative answer and pretended not to know anything about it. Except, didn't he own the forest? The Lord explained that he couldn't have known everything since the area was so large. Yrst was sure that someone lived in that cabin. Maybe he was testing their reactions? Ariadne tried to keep quiet, but now she was more willing to hide it. The girl mumbled that a witch had taken up residence there, a very scary woman who cursed people. And what a terrible smell she gave off. You could smell it from the other side of the hill. Even with the power of the royal family that represents God, there is no way to deal with such an odor. Ariadne begged him to stay away from that hut, but Yrst was having fun. He understood perfectly well that the lady was worried about the imperial family. However, it was a pity that the wildlife in the forest could only be observed, since the girl said so. Then wouldn't it be better to avoid the forest on principle, except that the man didn't understand what kind of stench he was talking about. If he could smell Lila's scent, he wouldn't be able to say so. When Yrst smelled that beautiful odor that accidentally touched his nose, his feet were already carrying him to the source, the light scent of flowers. No, it wasn't just the scent of flowers. No plant smelled so enticing. It was as if the smell had awakened all his dormant instincts, as if it had resurrected the wildness that had weakened in him, as if it made him an animal in heat. But to be honest, that cabbage soup was disgusting. A dish made of nothing but a vegetable. You couldn't call it cooking. Lila was holding the candlestick. Candles are expensive. Only the Lord and some rich merchants can afford them here. So much for the lie. And there is such a thing in such a dilapidated house. It was clear that Lila had something to do with the Lord. What about now? Yrst only smiled at Ariadne, but she melted under his gaze. What a pity. He wished Lila were here instead, a low-grade aristocrat who even manipulated like that. The Lord said his servant looked tired, so his eldest daughter was going to see the man off. If money was at stake, His Majesty's servant would gladly fall for such a trick, even sell his soul. Well, it was better than biting a girl to death in her own bedroom. Even Ariadne played tricksy games. And she fell right into the arms of the Crown Prince. What luck. Yrst knew she'd been raised in the love of her foolish parents. Such looks were not uncommon in the capital, but Ariadne here took full advantage of them, what she could, and the adults who made it possible were always there for her. She was similar to Lila, so the man would be lenient, but encouraging the sassy behavior was not going to be tolerated by Yrst. He pushed her away and exclaimed that he would prefer her death. The expression on his face reflected utter disgust. What did she expect? The Crown Prince explained that he had already memorized the structure of the estate and knew how to get to his room. He snapped and said goodnight. It was more like a curse, though. He didn't like the idea initially. This woman, the Lord, and the manor, he needed that scent. The man opened the door and called out to Suri, who was humbly waiting for his master, lighting a fire before he arrived. Yrst didn't think he dreamed of being a vagrant anytime soon. How angry he was. Suri was sure that when His Highness became emperor, his dream of becoming the best chamberlain of the imperial family who could support him with all his heart would come true. The boy received 500 shillings for it, and that wasn't enough. They said they'd give him more if it worked out, but it didn't. Suri is an old man in the boy's body. First added that there was a hut in the Lord's forest where the witch lived. He asked his assistant to find out all about her. The girl's name was Lila. Suri wondered if there was any need for His Highness to get close to her, despite all the false rumors. Although it was more of a cautionary tale, what if this witch could really curse? What is her full name? Where did she come from? Who are her parents? What does she do? Since when did she live there? Vyrst wished he knew everything about her life. He never felt sorry for Suri. The boy, on the other hand, couldn't disobey. With that kind of influence, the girl could turn out to be a great mage, so he was going to find out everything. In the morning, he was told to prepare candles and a horse. But Suri's curiosity was already overstepping its bounds. Tomorrow morning, everything would be ready. It had been 100 years since the witch hunts were abolished, but nothing had changed. The crown prince immediately realized how she had been treated by Lila all her life. Even the Suri of the capital reacted the same way to a witch, and the village people were no better. She was probably rejected by everyone. She was treated like a witch cursed by a demon, and her parents had probably abandoned her. For this simple and obvious reason, the girl lived completely alone in a hut isolated from the rest of the world. Therefore, she acted like an abandoned and frightened kitten. Lila's past was very unhappy. But what about her? The girl was looking at the coin. What was on that guy's mind? Left the money even when she said she didn't need it. Is this a man sent by God to make fun of her? God had purposely sent someone with no sense of smell to laugh when Lila was waiting for him to return. Just like he said. She was convinced the guy had said they'd see each other again just out of politeness. Just like her grandfather. Well, but now that Lila was alone, she could mind her own business. Not surprisingly, the water was cold, but she had to be patient. If she washed more often, maybe she wouldn't smell so bad. That money. Lila could buy not a candle, but at least oil for the lamp, and there would be enough for meat for the first time in a month. But the problem was that she would have to go to the market herself. This man, unlike the others, didn't mock her. On the contrary, he thanked her and even gave her money, and he was not afraid of her. What's that smell? Did someone have something rotten? People began to smell the stench and whisper, but Lila was almost to the meat stand. I should have just asked. The money Vyrst gave her should have been enough, and she should have told them to keep the change. We had to finish this quickly and go back to the cabin. The girl asked for 1 pound of pork. The man asked her exactly how she was going to cook the meat. He was so smiling and friendly until he heard the smell of... What was Lila to do? Run behind her. Someone inquired about the availability of turkey. Luckily, a positive answer was heard. The butcher asked her to wait for a while because he had to serve this customer first. She was so embarrassed that the protagonist just answered the first thing that came to mind. Soup pork for soup. The woman, however, smelled a rotten odor as if this place sold spoiled meat, so she left. The butcher didn't understand where the stench was coming from. Was it really her? The man was about to accuse her of the impending theft, but asked her to get as far away from his shop as possible. It was a stupid plan. Lila couldn't buy anything before people started to smell it. Now the butcher had pushed her, and he recognized her as a witch. Other people got involved. It was definitely her. Dull blonde hair and ugly looks, and that stench. They begged me not to curse them. Nothing new. Everyone ran away. No one thought to lend a helping hand. Lila told the man to give her the meat she was going to buy. He didn't even ask for money. Except the protagonist wasn't a thief. She gave 2 shillings and would even have change left over. Now he regretted having been rude to her. When the girl returned to her house, there was a guest waiting for her, who noticed her tears. Lila didn't give a clear answer and just ran away. Why was this man here? She stepped inside and tried to recover her confused breathing. What is this? Was Vyrst stalking her? Why had he come back here in the first place? What did he want with her? The man stepped closer and touched her curls. He was just concerned that such a beautiful girl was living all alone. Lila, however, knew it was a lie. She didn't think she was beautiful. And more than that, there was nothing about her that could attract a man. Couldn't be. He was a pervert. Why would he think that? What about her scent? Pierce didn't understand what kind of smell he was talking about, so he quickly changed the subject. He wanted to give something to her. Last time, the man was worried because it was dark in here. He was worried that the girl never took the oils. For that reason, he wanted to bring them himself. Candles. And so many of them. Last night, Suri had taken all the candles from the Lord's estate. They would most likely have to eat in the dark tonight, but that didn't concern the Crown Prince now. That's even better. Vierst wanted to admit that when Lila had let him in a couple days ago, it was as if he had met a savior. It was pouring rain, and he was lost because it was his first time here, and he'd missed his companions. Just wandering through the woods, and he thought he was going to die of cold. The man was grateful that the protagonist let him in, melted the stove, and fed him warm soup. That's why he wanted to return the favor. He kept thinking about the soup, but it was still too much. In that case, the Crown Prince forgave this strawberry. It looked very appetizing. Where did she buy it? Lila picked it herself. Viors, on the other hand, was sure that the strawberries were very tasty, simply because it was picked by a cute girl. What kind of nonsense did he keep saying? And why would he say that? The Crown Prince still managed to find out a few facts about this poor girl. 1. If you called her cute or pretty, she was angry. 2. If she got something, she tried to repay it, or if she wanted something, she was willing to sacrifice something. He glowed at the sight of her. And 3rd, when the Crown Prince smiled, Lila would avert her gaze. Right now, this hut was filled with Lila's scent, a bright yet seductive fragrance. Which part of her body would bite first? The girl didn't realize that the uninvited guest kept closing his eyes. He seemed a little tired. His gaze fell on Lila's arm. She had probably hurt herself when she fell. The Crown Prince was worried that the wound was serious. It must have been very painful. And he touched her. No one had ever done that before. The girl, as Viers noticed, hadn't even applied any ointment. What was it? He licked her. What was this weird guy doing anyway? Was he amused by this? Viers replied that normally people treated with saliva. Usually. That's a load of crap. The man would just remember Shuri's words. The Crown Prince called a doctor even when he just pricked himself on a flower. Wouldn't it be easier to use saliva? But the girl who lived alone in the forest didn't know about such a thing. Was she really the Lord's daughter? Lord Valencia's daughter, who was born with the curse of percussive odor. It became known that she had lived on the estate when she was young. But when she grew up, after 9 years, she was no longer here, and Lila wasn't even of age. Just one day, she started living in a cabin in the woods. Because of the nickname Witch, she never had any friends. But the fact that even her family rejected her is weird. Well, at least the Crown Prince got a chance to taste her. Sweet, just as he thought. Lila's blood is just like her scent, fragrant and delicious. And it was driving him crazy. He wanted more. The man pulled her to him and hugged her. When he looked at her, it was like he became someone else. Viorst asked her to come with him. The man promised her he would get her out of this damn ditch, and then he would succeed. On the first day at the cabin, the protagonist couldn't sleep. Because of the darkness of the forest, nothing could be seen. She cried, and the thunder sounded to her like a punishment, and then the girl realized everything that was happening to her before and now. She could only cope with it herself. Did someone care when she was in pain? Someone sympathized with her suffering? Didn't yell that Lila was dirty, or talk to her while holding her hand. At times like this, the girl really understood that this man didn't smell. He continued to press in and hugged her even more. So what of it? The protagonist pushed him away. He wouldn't be able to save her. Lila mumbled that she wasn't alive in any filthy gutter. She was the source of this abomination. His heavy gaze fell on her frail shoulders. The girl sat down on a rickety chair and looked at the gift she had received. Although, you couldn't even call it a stare. It could have seemed like Lila was in prostration. In response, Viers was silent and added that he would return the next day because his interlocutor was tired. After this sentence, he left. Why was this strange guy trying every possible way to see her? Grandpa always felt sorry for her, and then he felt sorry for her too. Except his words sounded different. What was Lila to do? The next morning, Viers reappeared on her doorstep. He continued to give her a smile from ear to ear. Lila said there were too many. Her favor last night wasn't worth the candles he'd given her. Perhaps it really was too much. The Crown Prince would accept this favor, but Lila wanted to thank him too. Therefore, Viors could say what he would like to receive. Well, a plan had already matured in his mind. Of course, he agreed the guy wanted Lila to... Meanwhile, people were telling the Lord that it was too cruel. How could they be calm? The villagers were now living in fear because of the witch. She had even been in the settlement yesterday. So everyone scattered to their homes yesterday. On top of that, the witch had bought goods from the butcher, and now everyone thought his store was cursed. It was a shame. What is she doing? Lord Valencia mentally thought about the fact that his eldest daughter should have lived quietly in the forest. So why did she make things so complicated? Was it revenge for them not sending her the things she needed? The villagers were so agitated because of her. How dare they, ignoring the Lord's status, crowd in front of his house like this? What was he supposed to do in such a situation? Did the man keep silent because the rumors were true? The guard at the gate, Alex, said that the witch had come here. She also claimed to be the Lord's daughter. Is that true? So that's why he was delaying her banishment. As it turned out, this rumor had been floating around for a long time. It was unacceptable to him. If it turned out that Lila, that is, the witch, was really his daughter, people might leave his territory. If that happened, there would be no one to collect taxes from. Ariadne called out to everyone, drawing everyone's attention. She was really sorry. She wanted to apologize to everyone first. The girl even bowed. She explained that they thought they had done everything to prevent the witch from coming to the settlement, but they had not expected such a thing. She was sorry that they had not been able to prevent such an unexpected act, and when the witch came to their estate, they were ashamed to remember such a small thing. Could it be that the witch's mind had become clouded? Wouldn't that be very dangerous? Most likely it was. They would make a decision soon. There were rumors that there were strong mages in the capital who were not affected by her power, so they were thinking of hiring them, and then they would burn the witch. Of course, it would cost a lot of money, but for the sake of peace in their lands, they would sacrifice everything necessary. Ariadne had given them hope. Now the inhabitants were smiling happily. In that case, could they go home? Of course. Miss had taken such good care of them. Now they had nothing to worry about. It was impossible. The Lord was swept away by what his youngest daughter had said. Ariadne wanted to get rid of Lila. Was she really going to do that? What else was there to do? Ariadne had been saying that for 20 years. Except how could a girl do this to her own sister? She didn't want a sister like that. She certainly didn't. Ariadne didn't even consider that she had a sister at all. But still, did she really want to hire a mage? They didn't have that much money. And even if they did, it would be difficult. It was obvious that the girl had said this to make people leave. Lord Valencia let go because it was possible to find excuses for people. For example, a witch could curse anyone. So no matter how much money was offered, there would be no suitable mage willing to come. However, the girl felt it would have to be done someday. As the villagers surrounded and questioned the Lord, he had been afraid of being exposed, but now he was throwing sweat from fear. From the thought that Ariadne might actually kill Lila. His Ariadne, his flesh and blood. His second daughter who had always been so beautiful. But she had been an unusual child since childhood, slowly revealing her gestural side. In front of people, the girl pretended to be a kind and beautiful lady, but the man was afraid that she might suddenly change, even though she was his daughter. At this moment, the prince's servant was looking for Lord Valencia. Apparently, the crown prince was considering the Lord's daughter as a bride. Had His Highness himself said so? Or was it Suri's assumption? As it turned out, it was Vyer's words. Why all of a sudden? The Lord didn't expect this at all. His daughter is the crown prince's wife. Then will he become his son-in-law? The son-in-law of the future emperor. And his daughter will become the empress. Suri asked how long it would take for his daughter to pack. His Highness would like to personally bring the Lord's daughter to the imperial palace. So, how long will it take? The man jumped up because it was impossible to keep His Highness waiting. But Shuri was silent as if he wanted to convey something else. As it turned out, it was because of Lord Valencia's promise. Ariadne held out a red bag, but it wasn't necessary because the man was going to find a good use for them. The deadline was the day after tomorrow. By that time, the girl had to be prepared. Had the prince said what he wanted for dinner and any specific requests, except that Virus already had plans for tonight, and that was his private life. Lila had made him dinner, just like her uninvited guest had asked her to. Then maybe what was on his plate was an appetizer. Then the main course after that would be steak, right? He said he wanted dinner in return for the candles, but it seemed the man was expecting too much. Maybe he should have thought of something else. Lila, on the other hand, couldn't understand what he was talking about. Fierce noticed that she was bleeding. How did he get behind her? And so fast, maybe he should have treated her. By that the guy meant saliva. That was so weird. When his tongue touched her, a shiver ran through her whole body. But she wasn't disgusted. Virus wished he could change his request, but what if Lila couldn't fulfill it? He promised it would be something simpler. Then they needed to go outside first. Lila took a hard, yet so seductive gulp of air. Was it because Virus was walking so fast? She wondered how much longer they had left to wander, especially what could the protagonist even do for him in a place like this. But if the Crown Prince said right away, it would be boring, so he wanted to keep silent. Would it be something fun? Fortunately, there wasn't much left to walk, so she didn't need to worry. Lila didn't know what to think, so he'd lied that it would be easier, and here they were. The man had found this place while hunting and wanted to show it to her. There were so many colors. They had such a strong scent that it filled Lila's chest directly. What a funny expression she had. The scent of the flowers. Right now, Vjorst couldn't even smell it because of the scent of the girl's body. No matter how much he drank, it was always not enough for him. The Crown Prince wanted her more and more, and even though he knew she would die because of his thirst. But the desire to possess her was stronger. With Lila, when she was around him, many things happened for the first time, and it made her confused, but it was surprising and pleasurable. That's what she wanted to say. And now it seemed to her again that she wasn't paying for the favor, but receiving it herself. The protagonist wanted to cook whatever he wanted once more. What was he talking about? Steak. Now it was safe to go back. Was the Crown Prince really considering the witch? As a bride, Suri didn't understand how to resist His Majesty's restrictions. Virus had to choose someone from an influential family in the capital, not the family of a provincial lord. Maybe it wasn't too late to change his mind and hurry back to the palace, but Virus was no longer listening. He wanted to trample these pathetic flowers. He wanted to take everything and tear it all away mercilessly. He wanted to bite her from head to toe and make her his own. An animal desire was growing in him. Yes, and so it was time to go after the prey. The Crown Prince asked Suri to tell the Lord his words. At this time, Lila was trying to catch the white hare that ran away again. What could she even catch with this old thing? Those horrible people. If they decided they weren't going to provide her with food, they would have given her something better to hunt with. But the trap wasn't broken. Lila couldn't even read. That's it. Don't give a damn about that steak. What was she even doing? Why did she promise to pay him back? Lila seemed to have gotten weird after meeting him. She remembered that he liked steak and decided to catch game with a trap she'd never used. And when he treated her wound, it was so embarrassing. There was no other reason. It was just that Lila still hadn't repaid him. So it was impossible to think of more than that. What did Shuri just say? His daughter who will become the prince's wife is not Ariadne. Lord Valencia pretended he didn't understand anything. If Shuri wasn't joking, then what did it mean? Speaking of which, the prince wasn't here. Naturally, the lord thought he would pick Ariadne up in his carriage, so he didn't prepare them. Except the Crown Prince's servant didn't misspoke when he said that Vjorst wanted to take the girl to the imperial palace. He only said that this daughter was not Lady Ariadne. The lord continued to play, as if he had no more daughters. But how did they know of her existence? There really aren't any secrets from the imperial family. Ariadne now joined the dialogue as well. The Crown Prince needed the eldest daughter, Lila. Would they really make her a bride? In that case, Lord Valencia was going to escort her. Ariadne, on the other hand, wanted to know when Beats had seen Lila. He'd said he'd found her in a cabin in the woods while he was out hunting. Even if that's true, how is that possible? The Lord introduced his daughter to them, and even gave them money. They paid as a thank you for their successful cooperation. But isn't this a success? The Lord's daughter will go to the imperial palace as a candidate for the prince's bride. Except the man is talking about Ariadne. He couldn't even contradict Suri, or even though she's an abandoned daughter, since the Lord had 2 daughters. Apparently there was a misunderstanding. It's good that even though it was late, they understood each other. But in any case, Miss Lila won't be able to leave today. Suri gave them 1 more day. And tomorrow, at the same time, at the same place, he would meet the Lord's daughter who was supposed to be here today. Ariadne was throwing everything she could get her hands on. It would be hard to calm down now. How could the Crown Prince choose Lila over her? Just thinking about it made her angry. Except it wasn't Lord Valencia's decision. There was nothing to be done now. Nothing can be done. So he didn't care if she went to the palace, because Lila was his daughter too. Like that servant said, because one way or another, his daughter would become a princess. Ariadne was trying to convince her father that his eldest daughter was a witch. She tried to convince him that choosing a prince would lead to the downfall of their family. Would it really take much longer? Once the witchcraft is over, she will be overthrown. What will become of the family that spawned a witch who became a princess and tarnished the lineage of the imperial family? But they had to follow orders. Ariadne recognized that an important member of the imperial family had made an unwise decision. They would inevitably become accomplices when the witch became a princess. If they made a mistake, they would become traitors. Then what could they do? Ariadne had already thought of everything. She ordered a meeting of all the villagers. It was time to do what they should have decided to do long ago. A witch hunt? She can't take what Ariadne can't have. Somewhere beyond the forest, lights appeared. Behind them came the loud sounds of stomping. The fire was almost illuminating the planks of the house where the protagonist was making soup. It seemed they had finally arrived. Lila was surprisingly calm. This was going to be hot. She had once been sent a picture book from home, and in it, a witch was burned alive. Would it be painful? The girl wanted to face a painless death, but she couldn't help it. This life is much more painful anyway. In the end, Lila still won't be able to eat. Even though she couldn't catch anything, she pulled out some leftover meat and boiled it. And it was all for nothing. In the moments of her probable death, why was the protagonist thinking about him? The villagers, for their part, were just as afraid of meeting the witch. Would everything really be alright? What were they worried about? The Lord had said the mages would save them. So why should they? Except they wouldn't come to these lands. But weren't there other ways? And magicians aren't that reliable. Exactly. Even the priest didn't know what to do. Anyway, there was no need to worry. That witch is just a girl, is that so? And so as they approached the old hut, the door was opened by Lila. The man exclaimed that they had come to punish the witch, but she asked them to leave because they could do it at any moment. Except that the inhabitants had long since gone to reprisal so that they could sleep in peace. But they had done nothing for 21 years. So couldn't they wait another day or two? There was no more patience. But what exactly had they tolerated for so many years? What exactly had she done to them? Had they ever even seen Lila eat the children? Was there really a child missing from the area? Did someone die from her spells? Did she bring deadly diseases? No! Then what did the girl do to them that was so bad? Lila was alive. That was their answer. She lived and stank around them. That's what she was guilty of. Not today. The protagonist asked them to come back next time. What was she going to do? Drag her stinking carcass back to the village again. Or go to the Lord's estate, still believing he was her father. Or he wouldn't give her a penny. Lord Valencia had made up his mind. He had given permission to deal with the witch. Her eyes blurred at the phrase, as she wondered what her father's face had been like when he'd ordered the murder of his own daughter. No matter how much Lila thought about it, she still couldn't imagine it. probably because she hadn't seen him in a long time. And now it was time to fight back. The villagers were sure she was the real witch. Why? Because she was afraid of fire. Now all they had to do was burn the witch. But what is this? Who dared to interrupt them? A beast! Where did such a huge predator come from as a child? A man had been frightened by a bear in the forest, but this one was a completely different size. Has it been living here all along? Lila still continued to resist, but the man decided it was her doing. How dare she use such dirty tricks? Was this really the end? Would Virus come at all? And so the offender was on the ground, and the predator looked at Lila. Those golden eyes did not eviscerate her with terror and fear. She recognized them. The villagers tried to drive the predator away with fire, but their attempts were in vain. Now they were sure it was the witch's work. But she was also curious about the creature. In the 10 years that the protagonist had lived in this forest, she had never seen this beast. But wasn't it obvious? She shouldn't tell them the truth. Now the men were trying to get her to chase the creature away, but she was against it, though Lila was in no position to comply with their requests at all. The wicked witch. The main offender didn't know when she managed to summon the beast, but if you kill the caster, his beast will immediately disappear. All you have to do is pierce the witch's heart. The hunter had forgotten someone. A huge beast protected the girl and scared the rest of the rebels. They made a commotion and scattered in different directions. From surprise or madness, someone let go of the torch, which fell directly on the wooden hut. Lila exclaimed that she had to put out the fire as quickly as possible. Even if she put it out, then what then? Would she continue to live here? Just like before. A man is dead. And those who ran away will blame it all on the witch. A witch who lives in a hut in the woods summoned a black beast and killed people. How will they leave her alone? She always thought she was the dregs of society, but this time it's for sure. The end? But why was that animal staring at her so expectantly? Why didn't he attack her? Lila immediately felt that look was familiar to her for some reason, as if she'd seen it somewhere. It was dangerous to be here. Well, where had that beast gone? For the first time, except for her grandfather, someone was on her side, and once again, she was alone. After a while, Virus appeared and asked how Lila was doing. He was concerned because he immediately realized that there had been a fire. Fortunately, the girl was not hurt. At least that pleased him. Apparently, everything had burned to the ground. There was nothing left. The protagonist must have been upset that this happened to her house. Did she have a place to stay? Then maybe she would have wanted to go with the crown prince. He had already suggested that she go together. But why should she suddenly go with him? How could? Her house had completely burned down. Lila decided to go to the manor. What the people from the village said. It's all lies. Virus wanted to know where his friend had been going all this time. She had asked him not to follow her. He didn't understand why Lila was being so stubborn. Wouldn't it be better to go with him? She replied that she was going to her parents' house. In that case, the man wished to see to it that the protagonist got to them. Would she agree to that? There was no answer. Could it be? Yes. Surely he had a lot of questions. But why didn't he ask anything? Why she didn't live with her parents, or why she lived in such a dilapidated shack? The protagonist tried to reason with herself. You can't be mistaken. And so the scent followed. The guard met the witch, who asked to summon the Lord. Had he not already heard the news? Would she cast a spell on this place? Afraid? He appeared outside the gate. Father, the Lord had explained that the witch would not harm him, so he was going to talk to her, but Ariadne was not to know about it. The guard was going to call the men, so he asked to be given some time. Lila, on the other hand, notified her father that her house had burned down, so she would never be able to return to the hut again. The protagonist wasn't sure if she wanted to know the truth. But she asked nonetheless, did he really order her to be killed? Did Lord Valencia want his eldest daughter dead? It was a truth she had always known, and Lila had tried to ignore it, but hearing it from the villagers. Just a moment ago he was afraid that everyone might find out about their kinship, but even as she watched him desperately making excuses, the girl didn't want to admit it. She wished she could, too. She'd been abandoned by her own father. If Lila wanted death too, then why had she survived and come here instead? Those were his words. Her own father had suffered so much because of her. People could have found out she was his daughter, and then their lands would no longer be traded. Couldn't Lila just live there in peace? Then he wouldn't have had to make such a terrible decision. He ordered her to live quietly as if she were dead. The Lord would tell everyone that the witch was dead. No, she wasn't allowed to be here. Is that sadness? No. The sadness passed quickly enough. She no longer felt like her heart had been pierced. Now Layla just wanted to rest. The Crown Prince, on the other hand, repeated his words about wanting to make the Lord's daughter his wife, and if the man knew that, then why did he try to burn her alive? Lord Valencia thought it was about his second daughter. Hadn't they already discussed it with Suri? He had a strange feeling because His Highness looked different from usual. He explained that his daughter was born with a slight problem, and Lord Valencia was only trying to fix it. Has he really lost his mind? If not, then how dare he deceive the Crown Prince? What had he just said? The Crown Prince treated the Lord kindly, even though he was not of noble lineage. Not at all what the man had expected from the rumors. And then suddenly, Ariadne appeared, in black. She asked to finish the thought for her father. Like the girl had said last time, this witch, her older sister, was cursed. They tried to free her from the curse, but in the end it didn't work and they were left without their possessions. Ariadne sobbed because they supposedly had no choice but to send her away from the estate. She was sure the witch would catch them. Did His Highness understand? Ariadne wanted to enlighten him to the idea that it was better to marry a beautiful and kind woman than that rotten witch. That he had been deluded all this time. Virsh replied that she was a very talented liar. For a second, he even thought that it was not a man, but a snake sitting in front of him. Wasn't their dare too luxurious to lie about their poverty? Oh, and Ariadne herself sat dressed in an expensive dress and jewelry. Was it not so? Besides, the Crown Prince was inquiring about the reason for the burning. He didn't ask if she was a witch, but Ariadne could no longer contain her anger. The girl made herself think Lila was something she wasn't. But the Lord and his daughter could not allow this marriage. They couldn't. They not only dared to deceive the Crown Prince, but also questioned his greatness.
Hi.
Did they really think they were worthy to stand on the soil of the Empire after such a thing? From that moment on, the Lord was stripped of his status. The man begged and pleaded for forgiveness. But in vain, even Ariadne was frightened. She clutched her hands and begged to let her explain. How dare she touch him with her filthy hands? He grabbed the dagger and did the irreparable. Blood splattered all over the room. Everyone surrounded the girl. The Crown Prince ordered Lord Valencia's estate burned for insulting the Crown Prince's bride-to-be. Completely. Suri couldn't disobey, even though he didn't want to. It was a terrible nightmare. A truly unimaginable, a nightmare they would never wake up from. Lila, on the other hand, thought it would be nice to die in this place. She had lived here for over a decade, and this forest would be her grave. Today Lila would leave this hell, except someone was against it. Saviors couldn't let that happen. Did the girl really want to die and leave him here? His gaze devoured her like that, but Lila was begging to be let go. She was a witch, of course the man wasn't aware of it, but she stank horribly. That was the reason for her curse. That's why her house looked like this now. They wanted to burn her down, so she begged him to leave her alone, and not to come any closer. The Crown Prince, on the other hand, replied that she was a perfectly ordinary girl. Although he wouldn't say so, as Viorsh thought Lila was very nice. And he wasn't lying. It was the villagers who were lying. What did her order have to do with the girl being a witch? Did she eat children, like the others said? Or was she bringing the plague here? She did none of those things. And just because of her smell, she was called a witch. Lila just didn't fit this place. So Viorsh just asked her to go with him. Does she agree? Of course she did. From all that tension, how glad he was that Lila had given her consent. Now the girl was convinced that her new friend was an aristocrat. Even on the Lord's estate, there was only one similar carriage. He wore the same thing almost every day, so Lila thought he was poor. Even though this carriage didn't compare to the Emperor's, it looked noble enough. It must have been hard for Shuri, because the crown prince didn't want Lila to know that he belonged to the imperial family until they arrived at the palace. There he is. As expected, Suri could smell it too. The man wished to ride in the rear carriage. Well, since it was his wish, these two were left alone after all. The carriage would be shaky, because they'd be traveling through the woods. And it's going to be 3 hours. Lila didn't even know the forest was so huge. They were passing by a temple. The man offered to stop and pray, because then the wish might come true. Did he really believe in God? Who did? Only she didn't know. She didn't have to. Virus called her beautiful. Why did he always say that? Beautiful, sweet. She always thought the crown prince was up to something. Maybe he wanted to sell her to some witch, or conspired with someone who wanted to sacrifice her to become more powerful. It sounded interesting, but that wasn't what Virus wished for. His wish was... There was a struggle going on in the continent. The war had lasted too long, and the people had lost all hope. And suddenly, like a comet in the night sky, Onlionai appeared. He appointed himself a messenger of God, ended the war by unknown forces, and united the continent. And that is how the Onlion Empire came into being. The first emperor ruled by godlike power, and no one dared to oppose him. And even now, 60 years later, that power is still unshakable. So why did Virus need to conquer the empire? His desire is to take possession of it, so Lila didn't need to know anything because the crown prince would get what he wanted with her help. But now, Lila demanded an explanation. What was he trying to accomplish? And what was this place? They had come to a luxurious castle. As soon as Lila stepped out of the carriage, Virus lifted her into his arms. Then a strange girl named Cecil took her away, and there was an insanely huge room waiting for her. And a bathtub. This girl was peeping as she bathed. Except Cecil was only serving, not peeping. Servants always accompanied aristocrats. The crown prince asked Lila to sit down because he wanted to hear her voice closer. This was the imperial palace, and he is the heir to the throne, Crown Prince Virus Black D. Onlion. The girl had heard of him as a cold schemer, arrogant, and cruel killer. That was more than enough, but Lila did not regard him as such. In her eyes, he was kind. No need to believe the rumors. The man, however, hoped that the girl would live here in comfort. It was even surprising to her that there was warm water here. What she saw was magic. Magic is very comfortable. It can make the water warm, even make the wind blow. It wasn't God's gift, but magic could even heal people. The crown prince hoped that people would recognize its benefits. Lila, on the other hand, believed it would become a reality. Her words gave him strength. She was especially beautiful today. But in her head, the girl knew better than anyone comfortable that it was only a lie. The more Virus spoke, the more she thought she was becoming as beautiful as Ariadne. Why was her heart beating so fast? Everything was ready for bed. Lila asked Lila about the smell. Of course the answer turned out to be yes. Then why did the woman pretend the girl didn't stink? She had never once insulted her. Never once called her a witch. Cecil didn't know Lila had ever experienced such a thing. She was aware of everything thanks to the prince, and only wanted to do her job, looking out for her mistress. Her family had been looking after hereditary princes for generations. It had been her duty since birth. Lila asked her to leave because she wanted to be alone. Suri, on the other hand, waited until she fell asleep. Virus was now ready to hear the report. As soon as the crown prince had left the lord's territories, His Majesty had urgently made an appointment. He was now located in a small northern town. He hadn't given an exact date, but a letter had arrived a couple days ago that preparations were underway for his return to the palace. According to the plan, Vior should arrive in a week. The purpose is to develop the northern territories and promote tourism. Didn't he himself send the crown prince to the lord? And now he's telling him to leave. Also in this body so far north. The man didn't know what he was up to, but he had tried to get them around his finger. Even though he had given his powers to Virus, he still had to attend meetings and make decisions. Doesn't that mean he enjoys his power? without taking responsibility for his actions. This time he left with the Holy Father. What happened to the Holy Father who never left the temple, justifying himself by saying that he wanted to be closer to God? What did they conspire about while the Crown Prince was away from the palace? Cecil knocked on the door, but there was no answer, so she went in herself. If Lila didn't want to be late for the meal, she should have hurried in, except there was no one inside. She was nowhere to be seen. Did she run away? Then Cecil must warn the prince, if His Majesty finds out. Last night, Lala reflected on the fact that her maid had said she would put up with her stench and take care of her. It seemed ridiculous to her because sooner or later she would be covered in insults. So much happened that day, and the main character was tired. It wasn't the first time she had seen this bed, but it still seemed too big for her. And not just the bed, everything was big here. Because of that, Lila couldn't relax. That was it, this place was more suitable, much more comfortable. And now Cecil had found her. The servant asked why the girl was sleeping in such a place. She was already expected, so it was time to wash up and get ready. Would Cecil be peeping at her again? It wasn't like that, but Lila didn't want to put up with it any longer. Just like yesterday, the girl was eating very sloppily. No, she was just gorging herself. Not surprising considering no one had trained her, but His Highness was so kind that no one could get used to it. He liked to tease her. Layla looked away from the Crown Prince in embarrassment. He pretended that nothing strange had happened and only continued to smile sweetly. As she looked at Beist, her heart began to race again, even though she thought she had calmed down enough yesterday. Layla awkwardly changed the subject, asking her companion how she should address him after all. Beist chose Your Highness Crown Prince out of all the options offered. The girl, who recognized the man's true position, tried her best to be polite. She was certainly not like the rest of the aristocrats, but she had been taught a few things as well. The Crown Prince thought to himself that Leela was most likely taught by the old stable boy, the only one who cared for the girl in the entire estate. Officially he was retired, but Beist had heard the Baron's other daughter had actually framed and killed him. Out loud, however, the prince said otherwise. He expressed his hopes that Layla would do what she herself wanted to do here, and if she was used to being treated informally, that was perfectly fine with him. The prince wanted the girl to see him not as a high-ranking person, but as a man named Beist. He admitted that sometimes he felt as if everyone was looking at him, but no one could see him. Layla did not understand why the prince suddenly spoke like some tramp. And anyway, the girl wanted Beist to assign her some work in the palace, because she couldn't relax while being looked after. She had been taught that favors must be repaid. She could only chop wood and mend clothes, but those skills were not needed in a palace full of servants. However, the prince eventually found something for the girl to do. Layla was brought to the library, where Beist had been reading and studying since childhood, and assigned to take care of the place. The girl outright burst into enthusiasm. The maid held out a map of the library by which to categorize the books. The shelves were divided by the sciences, and it was impossible to move books between them, only inside in alphabetical order. But first of all, Leela decided to do some cleaning, and Cecile went off to get everything she needed for that. The girl, left alone, exhaled, and then turned to the window in surprise. She thought she saw a glimpse of Beastie behind the window bars. Layla thought she was imagining it, since the hair of the man outside the window was silver. But, in fact, it was Beastie's uncle, the Archduke Lumiere. He had arrived here after a long time, specifically in the absence of Clark Baines Dion Leon, the current emperor, as he was not happy with the man's frequent visits to the palace. And when Lumiere arrived at Beister's, he heard the maids whispering about the woman the Crown Prince had brought with him. Was he really going away to fetch her? So the Archduke burst into his nephew's office, and from the threshold he was indignant at his action. What the hell does the prince need this woman? That's what tormented Lumiere. He thought it was not too late to send the girl back to where she had come from. Beast had jumped up, barely hearing that his uncle had seen Layla without his permission. He ordered the guards to escort the Archduke out of the palace without listening to his exhortations. Lumiere asked Flora sorrowfully to himself, what should he do now with this boy? The prince chatted peacefully with a girl who was interested in the rumors of Beist bringing a woman with him. They spread with surprising speed, most likely because His Highness did not try to hide it, even from his fiancée with whom he was now actually communicating. It was Elizabeth Rymont, and technically, she was not yet a bride, but was merely trying to provoke the prince. But the girl wasn't too patient, and Bist easily parried the attempt by pointing out that the engagement was just pending. Frankly speaking, the prince did not understand why he would marry the daughter of Count Rimouth, whom he did not consider trustworthy. But this man's family was second only to the imperial family. In wealth, the version that the count was trying to raise his status in this way was also not fully believed. Besides, the emperor himself, for whom the honor of the Onlan family was most important, insisted on this engagement. But why would he want to make another nobleman stronger? Elizabeth returned to the original topic of discussion. The woman brought in. She tried to press the point that the prince's guest reeked horribly of some unknown contagion, or in general was really a witch who had gotten close to Bast to cast a curse. Just a baron's daughter from the countryside, who should have been gotten rid of as soon as possible. His Highness, unable to withstand the flood of nonsense from the lips of his interlocutor, rose from his seat. The noblewoman tried to get indignant at the insults, because she was a future princess, but the prince cut her off. He put the girl in her place, reminding her that ordinary aristocrats should not interfere in the affairs of the imperial family. The crown prince had the right to bring anyone and make any decisions he wanted, and everyone else, including Elizabeth herself, had to remain meekly silent. Finally, Bist advised the girl in an ordered tone to concentrate on restoring her health before the engagement. Count Rimouth's daughter left in anger. The crown prince ordered her to leave the palace immediately in a prepared carriage and not to leave her home until after the engagement. This rude treatment offended Elizabeth, and she couldn't just leave here, deciding to make a few visits before she left. Layla stretched blissfully. She had almost finished cleaning up, and now she had to start arranging the books. This worried her, as Layla couldn't read, and it would be very noticeable. Unconsciously, the girl began to chew on her nails and immediately shuddered when she felt the unpleasant taste. Her nails were painted by Cecil, and not only them. A maid had washed Layla's hair with warm water and oiled it so that it was soft, and her skin was now smooth too. In addition, the girl had been strikingly thin before, but now she had gained some weight. Would Beastie say to this that she was a beautiful and lovely mistress? The library doors swung open with a slam. Layla's unfamiliar mistress in the doorway immediately cringed at the foul odor. She had knocked the girl a bit out of her element with her appearance and words. Layla had gotten used to the hateful stares of other people during her stay in the palace. The unexpected guest of the library introduced herself as the crown prince's fiancée. She had come to warn Layla not to do anything foolish without knowing the measure. At the same time, Elizabeth caustically remarked that the girl was just a temporary toy, which the prince would not even want to look at after a while. After that, the count's daughter wanted to leave, expressing her hope never to meet someone like that again. However, Leela stopped her by asking her back if she loved Bast. The noblewoman turned around in surprise and suddenly laughed loudly at the naivety of the question. Of course she didn't love the crown prince. There was no denying that His Highness was good-looking, but Elizabeth would marry him even if he was a filthy pig. All she wanted was to become empress and rise above everyone else. Elizabeth would do anything for that. She didn't give a damn about Bastie's happiness. Leela's fists clenched at that answer. With anger, she forcefully pushed the aristocrat's chest to the floor. Elizabeth flew to the floor, but immediately jumped up and threatened to call the guards. As before she could carry out the threat, she remembered the crown prince's order to stay out of her house until the engagement party, and gritted her teeth and decided to leave. Lastly, she threw Layla a glare that she would not get away with this prank. Then, heels clacking furiously, Elizabeth walked away. Layla resolutely opened the library doors and went in search of Bast, as she urgently needed to find out from the prince personally if that girl was really his fiancée. If it was true, she had to tell him that his fiancée was a very strange person who also did not like her fiancé all. But suddenly she was stopped by the laughter of the servants. They were discussing Layla, not believing that someone like her, so vile and with a stench coming from her body, would really become the prince's woman. They truly believed that such a mediocre, ugly, and poor girl would quickly bore His Highness. Some of them even thought she was a beggar, instead of an aristocrat when they first met. Then the maids smelled an odor that resembled coming from Layla. They decided to check and went out into the hall, but there was no one there. At the meal with the Crown Prince, Layla looked gloomy, and was so absorbed in her thoughts that she did not even respond to Beiste's call the first time. When asked how she was feeling, she evasively said that she was fine. It was clear from the look on His Highness' face that he did not believe these words at all. At night, Layla went out on the balcony, looking thoughtfully into the distance. She was accompanied by Beist, who came out with a cup. He offered the drink to the girl, but she refused. She had been in a bad mood for days, and it bothered Beisty. The fact was that when Layla heard those maids talking, she could only run away. After all, they were, in her opinion, telling the truth. There were those things she wanted to say and ask Beiste, but did the girl have the right? Layla thought over the fact that it might be better for her to silently leave this place. However, she didn't want to disappear like that. The girl wanted to be close to Beiste. So Layla grabbed the prince's sleeve and told him that Elizabeth did not love him, and then the girl asked if he loved his fiancée. Beiste only smiled sadly. It rained down from the cloud-covered sky. Layla understood from the prince's sad smile. He didn't love his bride either. But why were they getting married then? It didn't fit into the girl's picture of the world. Just pursing his lips, explained that marriages between members of the imperial family and aristocrats were always mutually beneficial. Factors such as location and financial status were more important than feelings in this situation. And though Beist would probably be unhappy, that was the custom. Layla didn't understand such silly rules, and she couldn't accept how aloof His Highness was about his unhappiness, as if it didn't concern him. But Beiste was the Crown Prince. He was among those people whose fate was decided from the moment they were born. However, if he was given a choice, allowed to marry the person he loved, Layla's heart was breaking. She wanted to help him. The prince was a good man in her eyes. The girl didn't want to watch him marry someone he didn't love and make his life miserable. Beiste smiled and dropped aloud. The thought of an illegitimate child that would be the reason for breaking the engagement, but immediately apologized for it. Layla pressed her lips together in tension and suddenly declared that if Elizabeth left the prince in that case, she would give birth to that illegitimate child. A silence hung between them, and the longer it lasted, the more Layla worried. What if Beiste thought her frivolous or refused her? But suddenly the prince took the girl by the waist and spun her around. They moved to the bedroom, where Beist once again clarified from Layla whether she is really ready and understands what it all means. And since a loveless marriage is unhappy, what about a child born out of love? The prince stated that he wants a child with Layla, but he doesn't want her to have one just because of helping him. The girl, thinking how cute Beiste looked now, became very serious. She, blushing, admitted that she liked His Highness. Of course, Layla did not fully understand what love was and had never experienced it. No one had taught her about it, but she didn't have time to finish. Beiste threw her down on the bed and asked for her consent one last time. Once again, he removed his shirt and leaned in for a kiss. The prince chuckled softly in the process, noticing how sweet Layla was, and he admitted to himself at that moment that he had wanted this all along. To kiss the attractive, neat lips, to stroke her body, to cover her scent, and become one with her. The scent growing stronger as the girl experienced pleasure. Beiste couldn't take it anymore. He was going to take everything. Layla's gaze, her breath, even that seductive scent. He was ready to suffocate to death in everything. The beast had finally eaten the flower. In the morning, while Layla was still asleep in the prince's bed, Beist was already fully dressed and the servant announced that it was time for them to move out. They left together and the girl awoke to an empty bed. Her thighs ached terribly. This really was her first time. It was breathtaking, and her whole body was shaking to death. Layla felt like she was falling down and floating at the same time. That's why she couldn't come to her senses. And yesterday Beiste had seemed very frightening to her. Suri reported to the prince that the emperor, who had barely returned to the palace, had immediately ordered him to find Beist and bring him back. He didn't know why His Highness was needed so urgently, but the servants eventually persuaded the emperor to rest. Beast's thoughts were on Layla, about how hard it had been for her last night. Even the most patient man couldn't have held back any longer. Layla had said she was going to have a baby with such an innocent expression on her face. She had no idea how a baby beast was born. God has set conditions to preserve Onlayan's strength. Not everyone can bear an Onlayan heir. Only a woman whose scent charms the beast within can bear a child from it. In truth, it wasn't such a difficult condition. That scent was an intolerable odor to everyone but Onlayan, so those who are different from the rest leave other people on their own. And just like that, these scented girls fall into the beast trap. They can't withstand the power of the Onlayan. The heirs are born strong, sucking the life out of their mothers before they give birth. And at the time of birth, they are stripped of it. A great and noble messenger of God. This is how monsters are born. The prince stopped outside the audience chamber. The emperor was announced the arrival of Baista, a Black Onlayan. Clark Onlayan, the third emperor of the Onlayan Empire, allowed him to enter. At a glance, the man realized that the prince had found the right girl. Layla slept until late. She was awakened by a maid who came in. She started to chirp something about the weather and the walk, but suddenly stopped talking in surprise. Cecile realized that there was no longer a stinking smell coming from Layla. Layla's stinking odor suddenly disappeared, and this left the girl extremely confused. Cecile assumed that she might be wrong, but now the maid could only smell the scent of fragrant oil in the room and the tea she had brought. Layla clarified again, wanting to be sure of the maid's sincerity, but she really had no reason to lie. Suddenly, Layla jumped off the bed and ran towards the exit. If she really didn't stink anymore. The crown prince and his servant were walking towards the girl. Bist was surprised that Layla ran out into the street in her nightgown and barefoot. But the girl ran past and clutched at Suri's shirt. The latter, seeing the lord's grim look, asked Layla not to come near him again. Of course, he was worried for his life, which could be threatened by Bist's displeasure, but the girl understood it in her own way. The man's request she regarded with disgust because of the odor. It was only now that it came to the servant's attention that Layla really wasn't giving off that vile odor. From the shock that had come over her, the girl's legs gave out and she fell over. Layla had begged so many times, begged not to stink anymore, to make that odor disappear from her body. Prayed for it every night, but that wish was never realized. And she lived in perpetual despair, but she didn't smell of anything now. Cecile and Surta confirmed it. Layla threw herself on one knee around Beisti's neck. She began to cry and thank him profusely. After meeting the prince, miracles began to happen in her life. Baista hugged Layla back. Everything was going according to plan. That's why Bist had a talk with the emperor today. The man knew that his son had brought the very girl. Moreover, the emperor was sure that the prince couldn't hold back as soon as he saw her. That was the instinct of Onlayan, proof that they were God's messengers. The surprisingly knowledgeable ruler also knew that the prince had spent the previous night with that girl and had left his seed in her. Shurai, who was outside the prince's bedroom door, heard some rumbling inside. He looked inside, discovering the mess made by Bist. The prince was always in a bad mood after talking to his majesty. But Shurai thought today would be an exception because of Layla. Bist suddenly ordered to kick everyone away, including the servant himself. Shuri thought it was to be expected. The prince won't cry even if he is pierced with a sword. He's just a stone that always acts calculatingly. Bay Estate can't love. The next day, Count Rimuth arrived at the emperor's house, wanting to know why his daughter was treated so roughly. The Count of Remalt came to his majesty complaining of his daughter's mistreatment. He suggested that Elizabeth was being treated this way because of the girl his highness had brought from the provinces. The emperor grinned, thinking about the fact that everyone was intent on pissing him off today. The first was Bayest, who was very surprised at his father's awareness regarding his and Layla's last night. Also, the emperor did not forget to remind his son that he should not fall in love with this girl. The prince rather cheekily expressed his displeasure at being made his bride by someone who didn't smell. He also wanted to break his engagement to Elizabeth. The emperor gritted his teeth at the boy's insolence. He had to explain why the prince's wish was nonsense. It had been 60 years since the Anleon family had united the continent and created an empire. So now the death of an Anleon partner might raise suspicion. If the empress dies after giving birth, that's why the emperor wanted the prince to have a public bride. She will raise that girl's child, since she herself will not be able to have children with her husband. It would be her child. But Beiste has violated his father's orders to hide the right girl. In a desire to restrain his offspring, the man applied to him generic powers, which he was going to give to his son only after the appearance of the heir. The prince bent 3 dead from the pain, and the emperor intimated that no one should know about Layla's pregnancy, and certainly not about her birth. Thinking back on it, the emperor felt that he had frightened his son enough and he would be inactive for a while. To Count Rimoth, on the other hand, the man promised to speak to the prince. Layla looked very sleepy, as Cecile served tea to invigorate her mistress. The maid squinted her eyes as she scrutinized the girl's neck. She knew that His Highness came to Mistress's bedroom every day. It wasn't hard to understand. There were pronounced marks from Baiste's visits. Cecile's mother had been the prince's nanny, so the girl had followed her every day to learn her work until she died. From that, Cecile knew Baiste's character well, and when he acted so friendly with Mrs. Layla, the girl got goosebumps. It was as if she was watching a production with a top-notch actor. However, could it be that Cecile was wrong about him? The Crown Prince met with Elizabeth again, over tea and strawberry cake. Everall admired the skills of the palace chef, but her friendliness quickly began to give off an air of falseness. She suggested that their speedy meeting was a consequence of God's will and the Emperor's strictness, for something had gone according to his disapproval. Only a blind man would not have seen the implication in those words. But the Crown Prince could not be put out of his mind by this. Coming in from a distance, he asked the bride exactly how she started eating the cake. Elizabeth replied that she leaves all the good stuff for last. That is, she eats the strawberries after she has eaten a piece. Beiste, on the other hand, said that on the contrary, he starts with the tastiest part, but after that he doesn't want to eat the cake itself. With a clear implication, the prince summarized that he had already eaten the red strawberries and there was no point in eating a cake that didn't arouse appetite. And since Beiste doesn't want it, he'll just throw it away after eating as many berries as he wants. Elizabeth was numbed by these words. Meanwhile, a man with a face very similar to Baiste's appeared to Layla. Layla felt a little tired because of Baiste. They had spent the previous night together again. A girl had asked the prince to be gentler with her, but barely hearing that, he had become even more choppy in his actions. It seemed that Baiste had a lot of stamina. Just thinking about it made Layla blush. But suddenly, a tall man who resembled the face of the Crown Prince approached her. He introduced himself as Archduke Lumiere d'Estrady Anleon, Baiste's uncle and brother of the Emperor. Upon hearing his full name, the girl immediately jumped up and introduced herself as Layla Violet de Valencia. The girl was quite excited to meet the prince's relative. She thought that their resemblance was not surprising, and moreover, she wished Baiste would look the same when he was older. Layla also recalled seeing Lumiere in the window of the library. The Archduke had been amazed. He had noticed it from afar too, of course, but how much the girl looked like Flora, even the beautiful scent. Lumiere inquired about Layla's time in the palace. Hearing the answer of 1 month, the Archduke kissed the girl's hand and said goodbye, promising to talk another time. The man's behavior drove Layla into a blush. That same day, Lumiere met with Baiste. He was not too happy to meet with his uncle, but did not chase away the guest out of pure politeness. However, and prolong their conversation he had no desire to prolong, so he immediately warned the Archduke that he dared not approach Layla. His uncle tried to appeal to the prince's prudence, reminding him that if the girl gets pregnant, she will die. Baiste rather cynically stated that everyone dies sooner or later. In addition, he did not understand why his uncle was so worried, because in this way they both came into the world. But the villain Lumiere made for some reason it was his nephew. The Archduke agreed, but in turn recalled that Baiste's father had also deceived Flora, the prince's mother. Would she have given birth to him if she knew it would kill her, and now Baiste is going to do the same thing to Layla. Lumiere demanded that the girl be returned to where she'd been brought from if her nephew wasn't going to tell the truth. But she had nowhere to go back to, which was why the prince had managed to get Layla out of there so easily. The uncle tried to object once more, but Beiste expressed his suspicion that the man himself wanted to steal the girl away from his nephew. He cared for her too much, but the prince had no intention of giving Layla to anyone else anyway, because now she belonged to him. Lumiere clenched his fists and in a fit of anger, threw in his nephew's face that he was just like his father. Even the facial expression is the same. After that, the Archduke turned on his heels and strode away, intending to cut off this meaningless dialogue. Shuri followed the back of Lumiere out of the office with a confused look, until Beiste asked him if he was ready to go to the meeting. Layla was going to dine on the steak that the astute Sile had told her to cook. Mistress had enjoyed the dish last time, but suddenly the fork fell out of the girl's trembling hand. She felt nauseous. Layla threw up right on the brought food. Sometime later, when the healer had already examined the girl, Beiste came into the bedroom, expressing sincere joy. He had already opened his mouth to express his feelings, but Layla immediately covered his lips with the palm of her hand, fearing that the prince would say too much in front of the servants. She feared the failure of their plan, in case someone found out about it, but for now, everything was going the way they needed it to. Layla was indeed pregnant. Finally, she pulled her palm away when she came to her senses, afraid that Beiste was having trouble breathing. Suddenly, the crown prince loudly proposed to Layla to become his wife. The servants opened their mouths in surprise. Beiste, meanwhile, covered the girl's palm and said that he didn't want their child to be born out of wedlock. Layla was not sure about the possibility of their marriage, but the prince reassured her that it would certainly take some time because of the stubbornness of the emperor. However, the crown prince would do his best to make it happen. One would just have to wait. After all, Beiste Layla and their child could become a family. That was enough to melt the girl's lonely and naive heart. She blurted out a smile and agreed to become a family, agreed to wait for the realization of it. Beiste froze in surprise. It was the first time he had seen Layla's sincere smile. But to himself, Beiste thought to himself that this girl was so stupid. A silly girl who smiles at the mere thought of having a family. Doesn't know anything at all, poor thing. In the evening, when the banquet was being held in the big hall, Shuri and Cecile ran into each other in the hallway. Cecile, thankful that she had been kept from falling, tried to leave immediately, but she was caught by her arm, stopping her. Shuri wanted to know the answer to the question he had asked her before leaving. The prince's servant suggested that he was disbelieved because he was 6 years younger. Cecile frowned at that. She thought she couldn't be happy and didn't want to discuss her feelings at all, so she literally pushed Shuri away from her. In the hall, the ladies in smart dresses were discussing the banquet in question and glanced at the crown prince with a sly look. He was sort of trying to calm the emperor down, but before His Highness could approach his father, he was blocked by one of the guests, presenting him with an expensive gift. As soon as the guests saw it, they were immediately convinced of the truth of the rumors. His Highness's woman would give birth to an heir. The emperor's eyes twisted with anger. Such a demonstration of his son made him furious. The prince, however, accepted the gift as if nothing had happened. He gave it to Layla at the next meeting. She was overjoyed and thanked Beiste profusely. The prince waved off the thanks and turned the topic to the girl's nausea. Or rather, finding a way to alleviate it. However, Cecile was already dealing with the matter, selecting a suitable food. Layla asked not to worry about it, for the healer had assured her that it was a temporary condition. In the next instant, Beiste pressed the girl against him. He wanted to pounce on her to the point of madness. Beiste's words about him wanting to pounce on her made Layla embarrassed, which made the prince laugh. Shuri and Cecile, who were watching, looked very serious. They were both unaccustomed to seeing Beiste so soft. Shuri was furtively watching Cecile at the same time, but never dared to say anything to her. Later in his office, Beiste listened to the report from the servants about the investigation about the Holy Father. Shuri explained his daily routine. He would get up early in the morning and wash himself with holy water brought by the priest. Then he would head to the small shrine in the palace. After the prayers were over, the priest would bring in the sick children. and most of them were orphans. The empire sends poor or terminally ill children to him. The Holy Father did his best to treat these unfortunate ones. People called him one of a... That being said, Surai didn't quite understand why the prince would want to follow the Holy Father. Of course, a servant would do anything for money, but following the head of the clergy was not to his liking. Suri finished by saying that the Holy Father was becoming more and more in demand and working hard, so there was generally no point in trying to find out anything else. Beast, his hand writing something on the paper, stopped, and he, frowning angrily, informed the servant that he would decide for himself whether or not there was any point in following him. Suri, bowing, immediately apologized for his impertinence. Bist exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Before his trip, the emperor was limping and only his close circle knew that. How could he attend the banquet in such a state? His weakness might be exposed. By the way, when he threatened the prince with force, he looked normal. Maybe Bast just didn't notice, but if that wasn't the case... The prince turned to the mage. He was interested in the ability to follow the trail. The mage warned that the ability didn't work at any distance, but within the palace it could be used. Basta ordered him to track down the Holy Father and report back. The prince needed all the information, down to the smallest detail. Layla sat over her textbook and felt her head ache. She didn't understand anything. The girl was trying to learn how to write, and yet she didn't even know the correct pronunciation. Layla decided to return the book to the library before anyone noticed and laughed. But, unfortunately, she was caught with the textbook by Beast. He brought the girl strawberries, and of course the prince's attention was drawn to the book in Layla's hands, and while she was mumbling, trying to think how she could get out of this situation and not embarrass herself, His Highness snatched the book from the girl's fingers. He was surprised to realize it was a spelling book. Layla clutched at it. She tried to confess, but there was no way she could turn her tongue. If she told the truth now, Bisu would realize she was a fool for not even knowing the alphabet. But the prince made her feel comfortable, assuring her that he would not be angry, no matter what the answer was. In the end, Layla confessed her ignorance of the alphabet. She was embarrassed that the prince's fiancée was so stupid, and she hurriedly apologized for it. Bistu's face stiffened and grew grim. The smile was looking more and more like a fake and strained smile. Right now, to the prince, burning the manor seemed too weak a punishment for those bastards. They should have had their ears cut off, their eyes gouged out, and their tongues ripped out. In Basti's opinion, a fair punishment for those who abused a child. But immediately, though, Bista calms Layla down by saying nice things to her and denying that she's an idiot. He realized something. The only person worse than those people from the manor here is himself. He's scum. He deceived Layla, making himself worse than a murderer. That realization paralyzed Bast, causing him to freeze. The girl understood this behavior in her own way. She threw herself around his neck, promising to try her best because she liked Bast a lot. Layla wanted to match his level. Bast suddenly jumped up, recoiling from the girl like a scalded man. He hurried away, saying he had a lot of important things to do. Sasiel was teaching Layla the history of the Onlayan state, but soon discovered that the girl had fallen asleep peacefully at the table. The maid woke the slightly distracted mistress. She apologized for her behavior. She was actually very curious, but she felt sleepy. Not surprising though, since pregnancy often caused drowsiness. Layla frowned. To be honest, she still couldn't believe that she had gotten pregnant with Bast because the toxicosis had passed quickly. Now, however, the girl felt nothing inside. It was amazing that there was a little person living inside her. Layla had never had a loving family, and it was a little hard for her to realize from the get-go that she could have something like that thanks to the prince. In between, Layla asked Cecile about Basta coming to her. But according to the girl, the prince was currently performing His Majesty's duties and had no free time. Layla had no choice but to accept these words. Thanks to Bist, she had learned how to write and was able to learn things she had not known before. However, with that said, Layla had not seen His Highness for a week. Of course, the girl was sure that the prince was trying to convince the emperor, just as she herself was trying to become a proper princess. And for the sake of that, one must pull oneself together and be patient. At the lavish banquet, The emperor, the prince, and Count Rimoth gathered at one table and complimented the event. Beiste watched the small talk between his father and the count without much interest. Today, the Holy Father was once again absent from the emperor's side. According to what the magician found out, he spent the entire day with the emperor, except for working in the temple until noon, and when he's not around him, he blesses high-ranking aristocrats. Beiste had a chuckle at this fact. It's obvious why the Holy Father doesn't do it in the temple, but in the emperor's reception room. It's all the fault of money. Soon Count Rimoth bade farewell to His Majesty, citing intense busyness, and as soon as the man left, the emperor remarked in an extremely displeased tone that Beiste had violated his orders again. After all, he had told him to hide everything about the girl, and his son continued to keep her in plain sight. Beiste parried that it was impossible to stop rumors in a palace where so many people lived, and if the emperor wanted to hide the girl's existence, it would be easier to lock her up altogether. However, that would be problematic now since it was impossible to hide a child, and overall, in the prince's opinion, God had set up a difficult condition with winning the heart of a bad-smelling woman. The emperor only squinted angrily at his son's insolence, but restrained himself. He spoke of traveling to the north, where he found another bad-smelling girl. This naturally angered Beiste, for he had not promised another heir. The emperor was amused by the prince's reaction, but the man continued to talk about his chance find. She was 16 full years old, and His Majesty is quite willing to pass the girl on to his son. She is young, and in the emperor's opinion, it is better to have a few cards in hand. Beiste's outburst of seething indignation was forestalled by the Archduke approaching their table. He greeted his brother and nephew, apologizing for his tardiness. Some time ago, Lumiere had entered Lila's room. Through the window, the girl immediately jumped up and curtsied, greeting the dignitary. This demonstration of learned etiquette did not at all please the Archduke. And on the whole, the man did not understand why he had come to see her. Alela no longer smelled that fragrance. It disappeared so as not to seduce other Onlayan when the girl became pregnant. Lumiere, on the other hand, knew about Leila's condition and still came like a naive fool. The girl suddenly asked the Archduke for a favor. She wanted to convey, through the man, the words to Beiste about not overdoing it. She could not say it herself, for she had been informed of his extreme busyness, in consequence of which the prince could not return to the palace. But Lumiere, smiling, expressed the opinion that it was better to speak such words in person. Therefore, in the imperial palace, where the banquet was held, Beiste was waiting for a surprise in the form of a happy Leila. A happy Leila in the imperial palace was a big surprise for Beiste. Not the most pleasant surprise. She smiled charmingly, clutching in her hand the herbs she'd found in the garden. The girl had used them before when she lived alone in the forest and could barely find them now. Leila had made Cecile bring her here only to give them to the prince. He could use this gift if he became severely overworked. However, Beiste remained silent. He emitted waves of incomprehensible power and looked gloomy. Leila was very surprised and alarmed by this, but at her question about her well-being, His Highness rudely snatched the herbs and turned on his heels. He asked the girl to leave him alone for the day. With a charming smile, the prince left Leila in utter confusion. In his chambers, Beiste gustily threw off his ceremonial robes and sat down on the bed. He was tormented by the fact that Leila's scent was long gone, but for some reason his body continued to want this girl. It was like Beiste was an impossibly hungry beast. Staring at the sunset outside the window, the prince recognized that he was indeed a beast that wasn't acting like a human. Shuri was both surprised and displeased. Asael had called him to the couple's seat to discuss work. You see, Lady Leila wanted to meet the prince because of her extreme longing for him. But the servant didn't think His Highness would come to her just because of a single desire. Cecile decided to push Leila's pregnancy since the body's condition is very unstable in the early term. Shuri exhaled tiredly, but promised to still pass those words on. Shuri reported to Beiste about his confidence in the Holy Father's corruption. As the prince had expected, the aristocrats had given him huge amounts of precious metals. Apparently, it was being handled by paid new priests, but most were of the same opinion. Beiste, after analyzing what was said, concluded that it would be easy for them to deal with it in one go. Then Shuri extremely unsure of the need to say those words, honored Cecil's request. He informed Beist that Layla missed and worried about him. The prince's hand froze over the paper. The mere utterance of the name made Beist feel a sweet fragrance. It made His Highness involuntarily clench his jaw in impotent anger. Suddenly a servant burst into the study. He brought extremely bad news. Count Raimont had been murdered. He had been found in the night under the terrace of the banquet hall. The society of the capital didn't understand who had a grudge against the count. It couldn't have been just some grudge. And the gossips were quick to find a suspect, the crown prince. After all, Beist had brought a girl who had gotten pregnant by him. In that case, both Count Raimont and his daughter Elizabeth were at the prince's throat. There were rumors about Beist that he was a cold-blooded and cruel murderer capable of such atrocities. The news of the count's death was discussed by both the aristocrats and the servants in the palace. Naturally, Layla had to hear the news. She knew that the rumors were not to be believed. She was convinced of the innocence of Beist, whom she knew personally. In her opinion, the prince could not have hurt anyone, the prince she was so worried about. Knight Helton reported to His Majesty that the count's murderer was either a swordsman or a mercenary. In a word, not an ordinary man. The soldier reported in the presence of the other nobles, and there were unpleasant whispers running through their crowd. Beist looked at the smug emperor with an impenetrable gaze. The father had spread rumors that his son was a murderer, and now held a meeting on the matter. It was very likely that the emperor had killed the count himself. Was he so angered by Beist's refusal that he was warning his son? It's true that the emperor played well in public. He persuaded the aristocrats not to believe the rumors that defamed the prince, because not even a trace of the killer has not yet been found. His Majesty ordered Helton to search the banquet hall, the count's estate, and everything in the vicinity to track down all the assassins. And the emperor has put Beist in charge of the search. Beist froze in amazement, and whispers of agitated aristocrats rang through the hall. They feared it was a bad idea. The prince, meanwhile, was becoming more and more enraged at his father's prank. In addition, the emperor had the nerve to assure everyone of the reasonableness of this decision, because his son is wise beyond his years and will quickly deal with this matter. It became a final farce when His Majesty declared his trust in his son. The aristocrats, on the other hand, felt that the emperor was too sympathetic to the only son he was so focused on. Beist quickly left the common room. Sure, he could barely keep up with his rapid stride. Things were bad for them. If they didn't find evidence, the prince would become the prime suspect with an understandable motive. Beist hurriedly pointed out that even if there was no evidence, it could always be faked. But it wasn't just rumors that made the prince suspect. On that day, Beist was not at the banquet at the same time that the count was also absent. Therefore, there was a possibility of framing those who were not present at the banquet and did not get along well with the count. Rumith's business had increased, and he had managed to make many enemies because of it. Sarai, appreciating this solution to the problem as a good one, reported that the Maj was currently taking a break from tracking as it was quite exhausting. He would continue to follow the Holy Father later. Beist nodded and escorted Suri out of the room. The prince was feeling frankly heavy from the piling up of events, and these disapproving whispers about his and the emperor's relationship. According to the aristocrats, it was as if His Majesty was an excellent father, and Beist himself was a less than grateful son who was about to disappoint his parent. And this was always the case. The emperor pretended to love Beist, but in reality he was depriving his son of his authority for his own benefit. And now the crown prince had fallen into his trap once again. Beist felt the need to get out of it, and preferably as soon as possible. His Highness covered his face with his palm. He was very tired. During the night, Beist visited Layla's chambers. She was sleeping peacefully, and beside her lay an embroidery frame. The girl was embroidering a panther before falling into a sweet doze. Beist frowned angrily. Stupid girl. Did she really think the crown prince had fallen in love with a simpleton like her? And yet she never once suspected anything. Why was she so selfless? That was something that ripped at Beist's soul and brought an almost tangible pain. Layla believes every word he says, praises everything he does. Why didn't she realize how horrible and vile a man Beist is? Undermined by his feelings, The prince crouched by the bedside and touched the helpless thin hand. He, the monster, had taken Layla, and now he would ruin her life because this curse would save them. The emperor asked the Holy Father about the preparations. They were in full swing. They had the blood of pure and innocent children, so they could fulfill His Majesty's will. The emperor smirked contentedly. He was willing to get whatever the Holy Father needed. Waking up, Layla immediately noticed the wrinkled bed, the warmth, and the smell, and meant one thing: Beast was in the chambers. The thought of the prince's visit warmed the girl's soul. It also gave her energy, and she went to ask Sile about the beginning of lessons, although in the morning she always asked about the prince's plans. Sile, much surprised by her mistress's change, went to get everything she needed for the lessons. Suddenly, however, Layla had a stomach ache. The sky above the palace was frowning. At that time, the magician reported that the Holy Father went to the basement under the imperial palace at night. The mage snuck into the temple while praying, but the Holy Father was not there. He checked the man's footprints with magic and saw a passage under the altar that leads to the dungeon. There was a protection spell that the mage could not break. The man was unable to find out more, except that the spell gave off a very dark aura. As soon as she heard about the trial, Layla was immediately worried. Was Beast really going to be tried, even though they said they had no evidence? But Cecile immediately calmed the worried lady. They were going to try Viscount Rumont, and His Highness, to Layla's great relief, was beyond suspicion. The maid was about to advise her mistress to worry less when someone came in. But who could have come to them on the day of the great trial? At the court session, everyone around condemned the deed of the alleged murder of Count Ramoth, Viscount Rumont. No one doubted his involvement, because the man was known for his cruelty, as he boldly used violence if someone interfered with his business, and stole from other businessmen. Hiring an assassin and massacring someone was not at all uncommon for this man. The emperor, on the other hand, grinned contentedly, and this time his son had gotten away with it. Here he was, the heir to the Onleon. Bista asked his father to leave his jokes alone, as he would not get anywhere with them anyway. However, the emperor had enough of the way the prince grudgingly grinned at his snide words. It amused the ruler. Biaisk could only tolerate his father's antics. After all, he was always so brash and confident. But today Bist was in a particularly bad mood, and enduring his father became harder. The prince's thoughts returned to the mage's words. There was a gloomy aura coming from the spell. But since when was His Majesty interested in magic? At the end of the session, the court passed judgment. The Viscount was stripped of his title and sentenced to death for murder. The defendant, hearing this, immediately cried out that he had not killed the Count and was not guilty at all, but he was taken under the Emperor's arms and led away from the courtroom. His Majesty did not respond to any pleas from the unfortunate man. Ambiste noticed that Archduke Lumire's seat was empty. The prince grimaced. He guessed where his uncle was now. Namely, the Archduke had shown up at Layla's door. The man desperately wanted to tell her something important. But Layla's stomach suddenly ached again. The Archduke immediately realized what was wrong. The power of Onleon that was eating the mother from the inside out. In a couple of months, this child will become even more unbearable. The Archduke didn't have time. He was going to tell this girl everything right now, even if this child gets hurt. Cecile tried to take Madame into the bedroom, but she waved her away, thinking that it was just the baby kicking like that. But Lumire's firm voice sounded. The man talked about how this pain would only get worse later on. The baby in Layla's belly was killing her. The Archduke that Beastie knew about everything also brought it to Layla's attention, yet he did not prevent this pregnancy. He told the naive girl that he wanted a child, but in reality he just wanted to be first in line to be emperor. Layla was simply used and not loved in any way, only pretended to be convincing in order to put her guard down. But the girl remained deaf to Lumire's words. It was easier for her to believe that this uncle is a bad man who slanders his good nephew than to accept this cruel truth. However, the Archduke was not willing to back down so easily. He told Layla of the curse associated with the smelling girl. To an ordinary person, she smells vile, but to Onleon, she is more fragrant and seductive than any flower. Only such a woman is capable of giving birth to an heir to Onleon. The throne was always given to the first to have a successor. That is why Lumiere himself did not become emperor, although he was crowned prince. Man could not bear the genes and power of the Onleon. When flowers bear fruit, they die, living only one season. By bearing this child, Layla will die. Shura and Cecil were horrified to hear this revelation, and Layla was in desperate denial, not wanting to believe that the prince could have liked the stench. She was still mindful of Bastie's problems with his sense of smell. However, Lumiere had quite reasonably pointed out that the words about the sense of smell were probably just a lie, because a girl had to open her heart in order to get pregnant. In that case, Bastie could have said anything. Layla rushed to the door, but ran into the towering figure of Bayest. The girl began to resent the Archduke for being a terrible man, saying all sorts of nasty things about him. The prince, however, ignored Layla's words, turning to his uncle, and made sure Lumiere told her everything. Layla reached for the prince's hand. She was shivering to the point of wanting to hear him confirm her words. She wanted to hear that the Archduke was a liar, that Bastie had never lied to her, that he loved her. However, Bastie did not spare Layla. He confirmed not her words, but Lumiere's. The girl recoiled in disbelief, and the prince smiled grimly and said ingratiatingly that he had never confessed his love to her. Layla's world began to crumble rapidly. Bastie didn't love her. It hurt so painful in her chest it felt like it was about to burst. Bitter tears flowed from her eyes. The girl rushed past Cecile with a terrible cry, hoping to get as far away from the prince and her terrible pain as possible. Just inside the hall, however, she fell unconscious to the floor. Cecile, who rushed to her, tried to call out to her mistress, but she continued to lie senseless. Outside the window, a terrible downpour had broken out. Layla remained unconscious. The doctor reported that she had fallen into unconsciousness due to a terrible shock, because abdominal pain at such an early stage of pregnancy did not cause fainting. Bastie ordered the doctor to examine Layla upon awakening and report back to him immediately. But suddenly the girl sat up on the bed, waking up. In a level voice, she said that since Bastie only wanted a child, she would do it and give birth to one. Layla didn't need this life anyway. It was always meaningless, full of nothing but loneliness and abuse. Even despite Bastie's lies, he remained a savior to her. And the girl has no pity to give up her life and health for him. When everything is over, he will still be Layla's savior. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. The prince and Layla were having a carefree conversation over a cup of tea. Bastie promised to show the girl the sea, for she had never been there before, and the imperial family had a suitable villa. But Layla said she could not. The prince looked at her in surprise, not understanding why she said so. But the girl, instead of answering with a smile, brought her sword above him and thrust it right into Bastie's chest. Layla became disfigured in an instant. Without eyes and with a bloody mouth, she was a ghastly sight, and it was the crown prince who did this to her. Bastie sat up abruptly on the bed, waking from his nightmare with Layla's name on his lips. His heart was pounding frantically in his chest with fear and confusion. All thoughts were now indiscriminately occupied with Layla. The girl had nothing but her body, which she was now sacrificing for the interests of another man. She had been abandoned from birth and was only surviving. It wasn't a life, but an existence, which was why the girl was so easy to seduce. How would she react if the prince told her that? With a blank stare filled with tears. In his office, the prince was reading out Layla's nutritional report. It was quite meager and consisted of only half an apple, 2 cherry tomatoes, a piece of bread, and 2 glasses of water. Bastie was unhappy with this arrangement, as a pregnant woman should eat a full meal. He did not want to hear Cecile's apology. Moreover, the prince was extremely angry and even began to doubt Cecile's ability to fulfill her official duties. He threatened to tear out her eye to make her work properly. Cerise stood up for Cecile, saying that pregnant women often eat poorly because of toxemia. And on top of that, this isn't the only pain Lady Layla is going through, so her poor appetite is justified. This only makes Bastie mad, because he has assigned a special maid to a special girl, but she's not doing a good job. Hearing this angry tirade, the magician decided that he would have to postpone getting permission from His Highness. Soraya and Cicely left the office. After a while, the girl grabbed the servant's arm, telling him off. She was unhappy that Suri's personal feelings were affecting his work. His act in the prince's office was simply unreasonable and dangerous, for the lord would not spare his servant even if he worked for him for a long time. But Suri was determined to fight for Sekeal's happiness, ignoring such risks. He still remembers their first meeting. Suri was rural, so the aristocrats in the capital ignored him and said he was not worthy to stand beside his highness. It was only Sekeal who extended her hand to him then. Having said that, Suri headed away, unwilling to listen to any of the girl's objections. She saw him off with a confused look. Sekeal had prepared a small snack for Layla for the night, as the mistress had not eaten much all day. But the girl had no time to start eating. Her stomach was once again pierced by pain. Sekeal advised her to try to eat later. It was likely that the pain would not bother mistress much for now. That caught Layla's attention. She suddenly thought that Sekeal knew everything. With anger, Layla pulled down the tablecloth along with her plate and told the maid to get away. The girl slumped to the floor, hugging herself to her shoulders. With tears in her eyes, she comforted herself that this was exactly what she wanted, that soon Layla would be dead. The one wish would finally come true. But how bitter, how pitiful the girl felt for herself at that moment. She, sobbing, sank into her forearms. The emperor announced to the crown prince that the engagement had been broken off by the death of Count Ramoth. Now he had to find a new bride. Bistu was not interested in listening to his father, so he was about to leave when His Majesty started talking about Layla again. Last night the emperor secretly entered the palace, and what he saw worried him. A girl is too thin, only her belly stands out. She might simply not be able to bear. The heir of Von Leyen. The prince parried that everything would be over in 5 months and there was no need to worry about it so much. Biste at that moment felt only extreme irritation at his father's interference, especially his arrogance and feigned benevolence. The emperor, seeing his son's moods, let him go. The magician looked for the crown prince as he did not find him in the study. The servant reported that he had gone to Lady Layla's room, as she had closed herself in her own room. The prince was indeed standing in front of the doors to Layla's chambers. Cecil explained the situation. The girl had locked herself in her room for 4 days now, but she couldn't close the window, so it was through it that the maid passed the food. The prince, tiredly putting his palm to his forehead, ordered to break down the doors. The servants promptly carried out the errand. They saw Layla shrinking in her chair. Her gaze was dark and vacant, as if devoid of life. Biste, barely meeting her eyes, froze unpleasantly astonished, and then quickly approaching, tugged the girl by the arm, lifting her to her feet. Layla shouted back at him. She didn't believe for an ounce that the crown prince cared about her at all. But Biste insisted on full nutrition, as the girl looked very exhausted and would hardly be able to give birth to this child in such a state. And if the emperor found out, he wouldn't let her out of here at all. Layla grinned evilly. The emperor, the child, that was all Biste cared about. The girl wrenched her hand away and rushed to the remnants of food on the floor. Grabbing a piece of spoiled meat, she began to chew it vigorously. Biste, dumbfounded by this behavior, tried to reason with her and take away the food. But Layla nailed him with the words that it made no difference how fresh the food was because in the forest she had always eaten spoiled food. Biste gritted his teeth, but the girl did not want to listen to his words, cutting him off at the very beginning. She jumped to her feet sharply and chased the prince away, but in the area of her stomach Layla felt the pain again. This time, the pain was much worse than any she had experienced in her entire life. Because of this, the girl fell to her knees and bent over. However, when Biste reached out to touch, Layla recoiled, ordering him not to touch her, for she did not want to accept help from him. At Count Ramoth's manor, the widow sobbed inconsolably, grieving for her husband. Daughter Elizabeth tried to calm her mother, but nothing worked, and she clenched her fists in despair. The girl did not believe in the guilt of Viscount Rumont because she knew for sure that the murderer was the crown prince. Elizabeth was not going to forget it, and decided to bring Biste the sorrow of losing a dear man at any cost. The mage spat blood. A bloody stain was spreading across his shirt. The Emperor and the Holy Father had managed to catch the crown prince's spy getting very far. The mage had seen too much and could not be left alive. In the end, they decided to sacrifice the mage to a black magic that turns blood into medicine. The crown prince rose from his seat, intending to head to the palace, and left the rest of the work to Suri. The servant suddenly wondered if His Highness went there too often, which instantly made his lord angry. Suri just didn't see the point of visiting Layla all the time. She wouldn't open the door anyway, and she would soon die in childbirth. The enraged crown prince grabbed the servant by the chest, ordering him not to say another word and stay out of other people's business. Bist then threw Suri to the floor and clenched his fists. Saying that Layla was not dead yet, the prince left the study, leaving the servant alone with his confusion. Bist did not respond to his shouts. Layla ate in bed, but soon set her plate aside. She had eaten very little, and Sasal begged her to eat a little more, for her mistress had already lost a great deal of weight. But the girl flatly refused. She didn't understand why the maid cared, because soon the fetus would kill her. So what difference would it make if Layla ate normally or not? After sending Cecil away, the girl covered herself with a blanket intending to sleep, but she couldn't relax even after the maid left. A couple of days ago, Layla had been in great pain, and now neither her body nor her heart could find any rest. She had not seen Bist since that day, nor did she want to, but today the prince came again, probably to walk in a circle again and leave. There was an unmistakable sound. Suri ran as fast as he could to warn Cecil that the crown prince had gone to Layla's bedroom, but the maid did not see Beastie. And after all, he should have come before his servant. Layla never realized if someone had come to the bedroom door. She thought that Bist had visited her to say hurtful words, and she would not even have the strength to answer. Just as the Duke had said, only death awaited Layla now, like a lonely flower blooming by the cliff behind her. The window shattered. An unknown man jumped to the bedroom floor. He asked the girl if she was carrying the prince's heir. He did not wait for an answer, considering silence a sign of agreement, and pulled out a knife. The unknown man rushed toward Layla, aiming straight at her rounded belly. The girl cried out, and sharply putting her hands in front of her, stopped the blade with her palms. Hot blood spurted onto the floor, but her stomach remained intact. Layla didn't even know if Basti would have been upset if the baby had died in her womb. The girl recognized that she remained a fool until the very end. From behind, a panther already familiar to Layla, who had saved her during the attack of the peasants in the forest, jumped out at the man with a knife. Running out of the study, the prince found himself in the palace garden where Layla had once cried, tears of joy. These memories frankly pressed down on the prince. But no sooner had he immersed himself in them than he smelled the girl's blood. The panther rushed at the stranger and mauled him. Layla did not understand how the beast that had saved her in the forest could be here. She sat down heavily on the floor, staring at her bloody hands. Her gaze was foggy. When Layla looked up, Beastie was standing over her. He wrapped his arms around her, clinging desperately to her. This was strange. The crown prince was acting as if he was really worried about the girl, but she did not have time to finish her thoughts, falling into unconsciousness in Bist's arms, frightening His Highness. Layla was feverish. She was still unconscious from the wounds on her arms. The doctor was about to perform an emergency operation, and the prince could only watch anxiously. Nothing could depend on him now. From helplessness, Beast's teeth threatened to wring the doctor's neck if he didn't save the girl right away. But Layla was in a very bad condition, and the man was not confident in his ability to save her alone. So the doctor asked to call the Holy Father. Beast grimaced. He knew that the Holy Father was not so simple, and it was not a good idea to let him treat Layla. The situation was saved by an unknown mage who introduced himself as a colleague of the mage who served the prince. He actually wrote that he would come to search for his missing partner, but Bist ignored the letter. However, the prince had a difficult situation right now, and the mage was sympathetic to it. The doctor resented the stranger's tone. After all, you can't talk to the prince like that. However, Bist didn't care about the mage's disrespect now, if he could really help. The stranger applied magic to Layla, speeding up the healing process, and the deep wounds quickly healed. The doctor came to astonishment. The magician, however, explained that it was time magic. He simply accelerated the body's processes, so the hands recovered faster. Only after Layla's life was out of danger did the mage introduce himself as Kyle, one of the 7 senior mages in the Empire. Basta had one more request for him. He wanted Kyle to use reverse magic on Lalea's belly to slow the growth of the fetus. The mage, slightly taken aback by such a request, still agreed. After a while, Layla woke up Cecile, who was sitting by the bed, came to her and told her that they were in a temporary bedroom in the prince's palace, as the old room was being rebuilt. Layla's hands were icy cold, and the maid assumed it was a side effect from Sir Kyle's magic. How? It was here that the girl finally realized the absence of wounds on her palms. In addition to healing the wounds, Cecile told her about the spell the mage had cast on her stomach. Layla was worried that her stomach was hurt, even though she tried to prevent it. Odd thoughts crept into her head. What if it was the prince punishing Layla for her insolence? The girl didn't want it to harm the child in any way. She was not afraid of not keeping her promise to the demon. She was afraid that the innocent child would die. The child was not guilty of anything. He was only conceived in her belly. What was Layla doing all this time? How was she different from those bloodsuckers if she blamed her child? Cecile told her about the fetus slowing down in her belly. That left Layla puzzled. Shouldn't she have an heir as soon as possible? It was in Beast's best interest. So why was he acting this way now? But Cecile had no answers to these questions. All she could say was that the crown prince was worried about Layla. The maid claimed that Beiste saw the girl as more than just the mother of his child, for it was he who had ordered the mage Kyle to enchant her stomach, because he was worried. And this Cecile was sure because she had known his highness since childhood. But what was he thinking about when he was saving Layla? Yesterday and that day, it was Beiste who was the Black Panther. But what was he saving the girl for? Just save the child. But that look Layla remembered, it said otherwise. The prince reported to the emperor that he had dealt with the followers of Ramoth, who dared to try to kill the heir. However, His Majesty had heard strange rumors that the main member of the imperial family was waiting in the prince's palace for some woman. Also, that Beast had summoned a new mage for the safety of the family. However, it seemed to the emperor as if the crown prince had fallen in love with Layla. Hiding behind a cold sneer, Beast called the emperor naive, because he supposedly wasn't going to throw everything away because of some woman. The archduke, standing outside the door, heard a scrap of conversation between his brother and nephew, and he froze, wanting to continue listening. The emperor, meanwhile, suggested that since the prince still adhered to his purposes, he might attend the banquet tomorrow. But Beiste refused, citing the business assigned to him. His Majesty, however, moved his hand and his son was constrained by force. The man again pressed that if his heir wanted to get this power, he should obey, not sarcasm. And at tomorrow's ball, the emperor ordered that Beast be found a new bride. Besides, His Majesty has prepared something special for the crown prince. Unconsciously, Beiste came again to the door of Layla's chambers. Stopping near them, he wondered why he even came here time after time. His thoughts returned to his conversation with the emperor. His Majesty's spies were in the prince's palace watching everything, and being near Layla's bedroom would only fuel their suspicions. He had to go back, but no sooner had the prince turned around than he heard a heavy sigh from the other side. Without fully realizing his actions, Beast burst into the room and in a couple of steps was near Layla. Hadn't magic gotten rid of her pain? She was lying on the table in a cold sweat with parched lips and a pale face. The prince helped her up, intending to take her to bed. The half-awake woman barely realized who had come to her, and then she asked a weighty question. Why was the prince in this bedroom, since all his words about his love for Layla were a sham, and he'd only brought her here for the purpose of getting the throne? Why do all this? Why did Beast act like he was really worried about her, and not the child? Beiste listened to the girl with an impenetrable face. He did not answer her, but picked her up in his arms as if she were a trifle and carried her to bed. There, the prince hovered over her and finally spoke. Yes, Beast will soon become emperor by sacrificing Layla. He will have an heir and inherit the power of the emperor, and then be reborn as a true beast of Onland. And with that power in his hands, the prince was going to kill his father. Layla couldn't believe her eyes. Uttering words so cruel in their meaning, Beast looked as if he was in great pain and about to cry. The girl reached out to touch him, but the prince quickly got off the bed, turning away. He asked forgetting all of today's words because it wasn't that important. In his back, Layla only managed to say that she was pleased with this illusion. It made her feel loved for the first time in her life. Even though it turned out to be fake, it was like love because Beast had pretended so well that Layla even believed it. And the girl was just glad, because she too now knew what it was like to love someone. She hated Este with all her heart for his deception, but at the same time Layla wanted to say those words to him, because thanks to him she was able to experience that warmth. Barely crying, Layla asked Bist to name the child herself and call him by his name often, so that he wouldn't become like his mother. The pain stabbed through the girl again, and she fell sharply to the floor. The prince lifted her up, and Layla went on saying how glad she was to love him, though he begged her not to say it. Soon the girl's head hung listlessly on his shoulder, and outside the window the downpour came down again. His father had always been cold to Beast. He was never interested in his son. So Beiste tried to be a good child day and night. He was never lonely because he always had a capable maid and a kind uncle by his side. He used to tell his nephew that if his mother were alive, she would love and care for him. And Clark would have gotten a slap on the head for that attitude and said, "You're very busy, but don't leave the child alone." Uncle Lumiere described her as the strongest and most beautiful in this world. In short, he often told Beiste about his mother. When the prince was lonely, it lifted his spirits, and the doubts that his father would one day notice his son were gone. Until his 10th birthday, on which the crown prince's initiation took place. That day, standing next to his father and looking at the cheering crowd, Bist was nervous. He hadn't even realized his father hid such emotions. The emperor took his son to the palace. Bist thought his father would put him to bed, and that made him anxious, for the man had never paid him any attention. The current prince considered himself a mere idiot for these naive thoughts. The emperor had not brought him to a bedroom at all, but to a cellar, or even a torture chamber, judging by the tools and bleached human bones. The confused child tried to ask his father what it meant, but the emperor ordered him to repeat after him. And if the son suddenly failed to transform as well, there would be no use for him. The next moment, his father suddenly turned into a huge beast, squeezed Bist's throat with his paw, and his sharp fangs came close to the child's face. Being only a child, Bist cried out in fear and tried to run away, but the emperor thrust his claws into him. A loud, desperate cry of pain swept through the dungeon, and the panther cub, instead of a human, lay helplessly on the floor. The emperor, pleased with his son's transformation, turned back, calling Beiste a worthy heir to Leon. He then sat down to the barely breathing prince, and it explained exactly how the power of Leon's blessing was inherited. The heir would find a plowed girl, impregnate her, and she would die in childbirth, and his mother died the same way. Eventually, Beast decided to break this sad cycle of sacrifice by death, and to do so he needed the power of the emperor. His father had promised to give him the throne, and power once an heir appeared. The prince didn't have time because the emperor was suffering from a lung disease, so he would find odoriferous women and have children as if nothing had happened. And that's when Beiste met Layla. Everything was going according to plan until the prince realized exactly how he felt about the girl. That ruined the plan. The heir would take the emperor's power and kill him. Bist was going to die along with his own child. But right now, Layla was thrashing around in a fever. Bist by her side, he ordered Shirai to go to the library and study all the books on the history of the Onlean Empire. The prince needed any information about past empresses and concubines. The servant was worried that Bist wanted to give up the title of emperor, but his fears were not realized. The prince's plan had not changed. However, he was going to save Layla, even if the child in her womb would die in the process. Cecile, hearing this, also volunteered to go to the library to help, but the prince ordered her to stay near the girl so that she would not be frightened when she woke up alone. The maid was taken aback, for she thought that Bist was going to watch Layla by himself, but he had to attend the banquet and generally obey all the emperor's requests. Sura clarified once again whether the prince really wanted to save Layla, even at the cost of the child's life. After all, it was much easier to confront the emperor with an heir. He's decided to defeat his father in a different way, astonishing the servants in the process. But first, the prince needed to prepare for the ball. So, calling Suri after him, he left the chambers. As they walked, Bist ordered the servant to call Kyle, as he had an errand for the mage. Layla, covered in cold sweat, never woke up. There was a heavy atmosphere of misery in the bedroom. Bist, who showed up at the banquet, noticed that the emperor was late. He usually arrived before everyone else to hide his lung disease, and during the event he would sit on his throne until the very end. But at this rate, the emperor might not have arrived at all. Kyle approached Bist, bowing courteously. The prince noticed that the mage was delayed, but he parried that Bist had only given him half a day, so he was still quite fast. Kyle then told what he could find out, which was that the trail of the missing mage had ended in the dungeon of the imperial castle. He was already dead. Bist thoughtfully recalled the words of the dead man, that there was an unknown force in the dungeon. He had probably fallen victim to that force. Kyle confirmed the words, adding that the mage had died presumably from black magic, from an evil force forbidden among mages. It was more of a form of spell realized through sacrifice. Kyle had no sooner agreed on the terms of the sacrifice than His Imperial Majesty finally arrived at the ball. At the sight of his father's firm gait, Bieste was astonished. Kyle grumbled about the Emperor showing up at the ball in honor of finding a bride for his son as if he were the main character of the evening. Bieste forcefully asked the mage to name the terms of black magic after all. They turned out to be a living person, and the younger the better, because that way the result was amplified. The picture in the prince's head took shape. That's why the Holy Father was collecting dying children, to become the embodiment of a god through black magic. The Emperor had promised to give his son his powers while he himself was torturing him. But, unexpectedly, Bist remembered the Emperor's insistent words that they only wanted a healthy heir. The prince immediately took off, heading for his own palace. After all, the younger the victim, the better. That meant that the most precious sacrifice right now was the baby in Layla's belly. The girl watched from the balcony. Alone again. She didn't think her words could have changed anything. Layla just wanted to say them about her feelings. And when she woke up, she overheard the servants saying that today was the banquet again, planned in honor of finding the prince's new bride. This convinced the girl that her feelings never bothered Bist even if she talked about them. Suddenly footsteps were heard. Knights surrounded her. His Majesty had ordered them to take Layla to the Imperial Palace. The knights were going to take Layla to the Imperial Palace on His Majesty's orders. They promised that they would not harm her if she followed them without resistance. One of them, the leader, held out his hand to the girl, but Layla suddenly climbed onto the balcony railing. She was ready to smash to death just to avoid going with these men. The knights tensed. The Emperor had ordered to deliver her safe and sound, and they still had to do it before the end of the banquet. Layla was frightened by their menacing appearance, and what they could do to her if they caught her. Oh, but she couldn't escape either. The girl didn't know what she should do in this situation. But suddenly a white jaguar jumped out in front of her onto the balcony, covering her. The soldiers mistook it for the incarnation of Von Lan, a god who appeared in the form of a jaguar, and immediately fell to their knees. The beast looked at Layla affectionately, and allowed her to climb onto his back. Together they jumped off the balcony. When they were in the garden, the jaguar took on his true form, the Duke of Lumiere. Layla thanked him for saving her and asked what kind of luggage was lying on the grass beside them. Lumiere asked the girl to leave the palace with him. The Duke didn't know why, but the Emperor was after Layla, and he didn't have the strength to protect her from his brother, and neither did Bieste. The girl objected. After all, the prince needed an heir. Shouldn't he then guard her? But Lumiere shook his head. Even if Bieste has to give up the heir, he won't choose Layla because he doesn't love her. Therefore, he might not save her and make another choice. At least that's what he thought. Layla clenched her fists angrily in disbelief. After all, Bist needed an heir, and he had promised to name one. However, Lumiere besieged her. Had the prince ever said that in person? The girl realized that he had not. Bist had never said it. Layla found herself even more confused. She had thought the prince wanted an heir by all means. But now, what would happen to her next? A noise was heard nearby. The knights were approaching. Almira grabbed the girl by the shoulders and asked her again to leave with him to find a way to save her life. And finally, Layla did make up her mind. She asked the Duke to help her leave Beast. Bist, meanwhile, was already in his palace, and on the way he fought the Emperor's knights who had invaded the palace. And if they had broken in so rudely, it meant the Emperor had some goals of his own and was running out of time. Beast hurried as fast as he could. There was so much he wanted to tell Layla, so he hoped with all his soul that she was all right. But the girl was not in her chambers, and the broken balcony door suggested that something bad had already happened. Beast didn't think Layla was safe at all. The Emperor had already made the first move, and it ended with his knights storming into the palace. In that state of affairs no, not dead, because the prince couldn't smell her blood. However, she was most likely taken to the imperial palace. Fortunately, one of the Emperor's knights was still alive, even though he was wounded, so Beist decided to listen to what he had to say. Lumar led Layla to an unremarkable house, in which no one had lived for a long time. He invited the girl to sit down while the man himself melted the stove because in the mornings and evenings it began to get cold. After a good rest, the Duke planned to take Layla to the doctor. Perhaps there was still a chance to solve the issue of the child, but the girl refused. Lumiere turned around on her in surprise. She thanked the Duke for helping her escape and finding a home where she could safely wait for the baby to be born. Layla asked to be left alone for a little while. The Duke was amazed at Layla's words. He said he would ask an acquaintance who lived nearby to clean the house for the girl was pregnant. She needed comfort if she wanted to give birth safely. Lumiere begged her not to give up at least that much. Layla agreed after all and thanked the man for his concern. The Duke, smiling, left her alone. The girl sat down by the window, brooding. She thought that Beiste was a lucky prince because he had everything she didn't. He wasn't like Layla. No wonder she ended up falling irrevocably in love with him and his tenderness. But it had all turned out to be a lie, and now Layla didn't understand who Beist was. She didn't want to love him anymore, and all the girl could do, in her opinion, was to bear a child and die. Layla apologized aloud to her baby that there was nothing more she could do. Under torture, the knight revealed that Layla had disappeared with a white jaguar. They were supposed to capture her on the Emperor's orders, but the mission had failed, and they couldn't chase her either because the leader of the squad had already escaped by then. After the prisoner said everything he knew, Bist wounded him and told him to take him away and make sure he didn't die. The servant assumed that the Emperor would evade responsibility. Already in an emergency morning meeting, he reported that he had not ordered the attack on the prince's palace. His Majesty would most likely blame the squad leader. He's been missing since yesterday's events. They had no proof that the Emperor had given the order to capture Layla. Bist rubbed his temple and turned to Cecile, wondering why the maid was not around the girl despite the order. Surai immediately tried to stand up for the maid, but the prince slapped him in the face. And then another one. While Surai was coughing up blood, the prince said that if they didn't find Layla, the servant's neck and his precious Cecile's neck would suffer. Surai had no choice but to obediently agree. Beast didn't care how far away Layla was, even if she was on the other side of the world. He was going to search for her to the last. The search for Layla began. Bist ordered a search of everything from the capital to the outskirts. Shuri and Kyle were traveling with the prince. The Duke and Layla probably didn't have time to leave the capital, and in addition, the empire-wide search had already been activated in the morning. Suddenly, the Emperor came out to them, asking his son where he was going so early in the morning. Beist answered a question with a question. He asked if the Emperor was really trying to use his son's child to live forever, like the children he had sacrificed to cure his leg. The Emperor recognized the prince's intelligence, but it was too late. He asked Beist how many people would like to see him as Emperor. His father had already lured many aristocrats to his side. If he did not grow old and continued to rule, they would worship him. They won't be serving God, but the Emperor. After saying this, the man laughed half-heartedly, and then proposed a bet. Which one of them would find the child faster? The Emperor mocked his son with this, for he had knights all over the empire, and it was almost impossible to outrun them. In addition, Clark was going to punish Lumiere for kidnapping the crown prince's heir. To do so, he decided to distribute flyers about his manhunt throughout the empire. Chuckling, the man wished Bistu to give his best. Luma returned to the house with the food. He greeted Lila, but she remained silent. She had not said a word to the Duke since their arrival. The man found it hard to believe that Layla really planned to just give birth and die, and Lumiere couldn't even do anything for her. Remembering something, the Duke told the girl about how he got this old cabin in the village. The cabin had once belonged to Flora. She had lived in it before she was brought to the palace. Lumiere thought she was a very special person. Flora was abandoned by her parents because of the smell. She had traveled through the mountains, reached this village, and found this abandoned hut on a hill. Flora looked at the house and thought, I will make this place my paradise. She restored this house for several years and even grew a garden just with her own efforts. Not only that, Flora earned money by collecting plants from the forest and took on jobs that others refused to do. Despite the insults, the smile never left her face, and the locals couldn't resist her charm. It was all because of her. Flora knew she was going to die, but she always said she loved baste in her belly. In the end, she was the one who comforted Lumiere, not the other way around. Layla didn't understand how that was possible. They had similar situations, but Flora was able to become so strong, and Layla could only hate everything and suffer. Sophie, Flora's local neighbor, walked into their house. The woman resented the fact that they hadn't even had breakfast yet, and the Duke was supposed to be helping her husband from today, and the lady was supposed to be sewing with her. So much time for everything Sophie didn't have. Lumiere apologized but interceded for Layla, who needed quiet in such work, and his opinion is undesirable. However, the woman objected that if one did not move at all during pregnancy, one's body would become stiff. So she urged them to eat breakfast and get to work, for he who does not work does not eat. Baste and the search party arrived at the village. The settlement was small, and when a stranger appeared, it was immediately noticeable. And 2 months ago, a pregnant girl and a man settled in the village, staying on the outskirts. This was the most accurate description Suri had managed to get. Bist raised his eyebrows in surprise at what he saw. Layla glanced at the doorway. In the doorway stood the old man who had once taught Layla. She scolded him for coming all this way to see her, even though she would have visited him herself. Layla immediately warned him that if he was scolded by Sophie's daughter, it would not be her problem. The man brushed it off as he realized the girl was worried about him. But he had lived a long life. 10 years ago, when Layla had still just been kicked out to live in the cabin, false rumors had spread on the estate, and then he had been wounded and thrown to the outskirts. On the verge of death, the man remembered his family back home and wandered there with all his might. As luck would have it, he met them. As a result, the man limped on one leg, but now lived with his family. Children's laughter could be heard outside the window. Layla looked up. When she saw the family of this man who had once taught her, she wondered if they were so precious to him that he was willing to even die. And what would it be like if Layla herself had been born into an ordinary family, sometimes fighting, but loving and caring for each other, in a house full of happiness and endless laughter? The man got up from the table, intending to chase the children inside so they wouldn't catch cold, but Layla made a request of him. She wanted her child to grow up in their family. He sat down on one knee and asked if this request was the limit of her joy and happiness. But Layla did not know whether her happiness was realizable in principle. The prince returned to the palace with nothing. In that house there was neither the Duke nor Layla, only a strange couple who had decided to live in a hut so that their parents would not find them. They begged that they and their child be spared. A servant advised His Highness to take a bath, but Bist told him not to come in until he called him, and disappeared behind the bedroom door. Left alone, the prince's only thought was to find Layla as soon as possible. Faster than the emperor, faster than anyone else. The diary of the first emperor that Shrey had found only said that he had tried to save the empress but failed. So what had Bist been doing these 2 months? Kneeling in front of the bed, the prince mentally begged Layla to come back to him before he went mad. Sophie prepared the cake and served portions to the Duke and Layla. Lumiere remarked that a woman didn't have to try so hard every time. But Sophie asked him not to say that because he had gotten medicine for the children from the capital. If the Duke had not done so, the woman would not have heard their laughter now. The due date was approaching, But that didn't make Layla happy at all. Sophie asked her if she had already chosen a name for the baby. This question made her even more sad. The children squirmed as they struggled for pieces of pie. Sophie tried to calm them down because there was still plenty of pie left, and there was no reason to fight about it. Layla looked out the window thinking about the name. Sophie's house was not far from Flora's hut, and their family consisted of 5 people.
So, we look forward to your comments about this story. To not miss new videos, please subscribe to notifications. Thanks for watching.